Right. Oh, thank you for tuning in. It is Friday morning, and Jeff Bell and I are here to talk about every single NFL matchup as we head into Week 12. Jeff, I always, these Friday morning shows after a Thursday night loss, whether it be the Bills or the Bears, are always a little bit somber. How are you doing this morning?
I mean, I fully expected last night. This is a Texans team that has really had the number for the Bills. And sometimes you look around the league and there's just these matchups that are very difficult for teams. And the Texans have proven to be one that the Bills have run into them in the playoffs. And there was that big comeback win that Deshaun Watson had engineered. The Bills, last year, they absolutely blew the Bills out. So I kind of walking in last night, I expected I do a super pick contest that has 11 picks a week that is split between college football and NFL, and you pick 3 key games. I took Texans plus 5.5 as one of my key games, and so that's kind of where I was landing. I fully expected to see what would happen.
That's a veteran fan move right there, is to like bet against your own team, and then that way, it softens the blow a little bit if you don't pull out the win. I don't want to spend too much time on this game though. We've got a lot to look forward at Week 12. First of all, bye weeks. We've got some pretty impactful bye weeks this week. The Chargers, who have been just on fire for about half of their games this season, are going to be out to get the Chargers. Yeah.
I think we should unpack some things that happened last night in fantasy. I mean,
okay, we
don't need to ignore
I don't want to spend
I'm
too
not going
much
to be
time
somber
on it.
Bills fan, super sad Bills fan. Now I'm, me, like let's just go.
All right, go ahead. Let's hear it. I didn't want to unpack too much here. I didn't want to. I thought the wound was still fresh, and I wanted to let it breathe a little bit. But from fantasy wise, I mean, we're still in the same place that we were regarding the Bills pass catchers, right? Like, there's just no wide receiver that we trust. Like Khalil Shakir, sure, you can get him in your lineup, but we know that the ceiling there is limited. I think Dalton Kincaid, when he's healthy, you're trusting him as a tight end 1. And besides that, like, nobody knows who's catching any balls in this offense.
Yeah, it's definitely, we saw a weird week last week with Khalil Shakir, comes back and has a huge game this week. And there are just moments with Khalil Shakir where he looks like, I've made the comparison of basically a dollar store Amon-Ra St. Brown at moments where you look and you see this guy, 8 catches, 110 yards. It looks explosive. And you say, well, why isn't he a featured piece in this offense? And, we spread the ball around in the scheme here with Joe Brady. But you saw the explosion run with James Cook. You see James Cook going over 100 yards, no touchdowns for Josh Allen. That dampers the fantasy day along with 2 interceptions, gets to 250 passing yards. But I mean, yeah, if you're going to place a chip right now, you'd place it on Khalil Shakir as being the guy that you feel good about. I do think that offense loses a lot without Dalton Kincaid.
And then for the Houston Texans, I mean, we kind of saw it last week, but I think 2 weeks now gives us a little bit more confidence. The Woody Marks takeover is here, right? Like we saw Chubb come in for a handful of touches, and he actually looked okay with his opportunities. And I was concerned that we'd see more opportunities because Chubb looked like he was running a little bit hot earlier in the game. But even with Woody Marks leaving for a while with the injury, he came back in and he just dominated touches. And I think that's what we should expect going forward, that this is now Woody Marks' backfield.
Yeah, absolutely. It is Woody Marks' backfield. He gives the team a level of explosion that they lack otherwise. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think on the Texans, that offensive line is a significant issue when it comes to being a heavy run team. And I think Woody Marks, looking at his skill set relative to what we've seen, especially the last 2 weeks, I mean, where's the receiving out of Woody Marks? We've got catches, 1 catch each the last 2 weeks, -5 yards in this game, 7 yards last week, combined 2 yards for 2 catches. That's, I think, where to see the next level of Woody Marks, where given what you paid for him, he's a smash value of what you've paid for him, probably, unless you really went gung-ho and grabbed him in Dynasty or something like that the last 2 weeks. But not having that passing element for an offense that really they need to win through the passing game. That defense is excellent. Nico Collins had a down game last night, but he had really come on the last couple of weeks, 11.5 targets over the last 4 games. That's just behind where Jamar Chase is at 11.7. So that shows you the volume that had been pushed through to Nico Collins. You see Jaden Higgins, one of your guys, has really come on in the last couple of weeks. You're seeing Dalton Schultz as a tight end that we can go to in fantasy. But I think Woody Marks on that profile, you just got to get a little bit more in the passing game, or otherwise you get these games where you're thrilled because of how many times he's touching the ball, how involved he is. And then you look at the fantasy box score at the end of the day and it's like 8 points. And it's like, well, okay.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the Chris Rodriguez of it, if you will. Like, we know he's getting the work now, but like, what is the actual ceiling there? And I think the frustrating thing with Woody Marks too is if you look back at what he did at Mississippi State, and you can write some of this off for the system that he played in, but he averaged 4.8 receptions per game when he was at Mississippi State. Like, this guy was one of the best pass catching backs in college. So I don't know if this is just a function of the offense that the Texans offense doesn't want to draw up these passing plays to running backs, but Dameon Pierce officially out of the picture now. Nick Chubb not looking like he is going to regain his role. So I think you make a good point. Like, we're waiting on that pass catching upside, but we also know that it's in the range of outcomes because we saw him doing it just a couple of years ago in college. So anything else we want to unpack from this one, Jeff?
No, I mean, other than just Davis Mills looking pretty solid given his spot. I mean, the pass completion percentage was down a little bit last night, but you're getting there in volume, getting there in touchdowns for the most part. And if you've had to, like me, in some spots, I've had to spot start Davis Mills in some super flex leagues the last couple of weeks, and
Been
he's
pretty
come
nice.
through in those situations. So
Yeah. Yeah. All right, got a quick question from the chat, and then we'll get into this. And I want to answer this question because it does have to do with some of the bye weeks. Talked about it, the Chargers are on bye, along with the Broncos, Dolphins, and Commanders. And we've got Peter in the chat asking about Kamani Vidal's long-term value. Do you think that he can get another shot on another team? I mean, it sounds like he's going to be buried behind Hampton for at least the next 2 years as he finishes out that rookie contract. What are your thoughts here, Jeff? Could you see Kamani Vidal having any long-term value here? Or is he one of those guys that probably should have just been sold 2 or 3 weeks ago in your dynasty leagues?
I mean, you should have sold him probably when he spiked a couple of weeks ago. It's been really weird because it's like every other week. If you look
Yeah,
through his lines, every other
it's
week
like
he'll have a great
25
game.
2,
Yeah.
23 6, like just up and down and up and down and up and down.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think long term or looking even short term, I don't know. I don't look long term with running backs, but short term, I think that you can easily see him step in as the committee back for committee's not quite the right word, just the supporting back for Marion Hampton, the role that Najee Harris was probably lined up to play this year. I think Vidal has shown them enough that they think they can project him into that role. Hampton's not going to have 100% of the touches, and few backs are, and Greg Roman has been vocal about the way that they want to structure that. So I think Vidal steps in where they thought Najee Harris would be, and then if Hampton is out, then Vidal becomes an automatic start, more or less, unless it's one of those weeks that he's not.
Last question I have about these bye weeks, Jeff. We got some word a couple of weeks ago that Jaden Daniels would be returning or could return after his bye. The Commanders are currently at 3-8. Terry McLaurin is still injured. Luke McCaffrey, Noah Brown are out for the season. Marshawn Lattimore's out for the season. Like, it has just been such a bad season for the Commanders. I understand the whole, just wanted to be a competitor, wanted to be out there with the team. But I think that there's some trauma here with this Washington franchise, kind of how things played out a few years ago when they took a quarterback number 2 overall. Do you really think that Jaden Daniels comes back at all this year? Because I see him just sitting out there on waivers in a handful of leagues, and I don't even have interest in picking him up. I'll just let somebody else kind of deal with that.
Well, I think to answer that second part, first hat tip to my brother-in-law, Kevin Sagi, is in the where we did a live draft for Football Guys Bowl in Columbus, and he's right on my heels. I have a pretty good team in that. I think I'm 9-2, but I kind of am concerned about my quarterback solution. I have Jordan Love and I had Justin Fields, and I didn't even realize that Jaden Daniels was on waivers. Kevin grabbed him on waiver run this past week, and that's a situation where I wouldn't have mind stashing him. But I think
it's league dependent too. I'm talking like shallow redraft leagues here. If I've got 5 bench spots, I don't want to waste one of those 5 spots on a quarterback that might not play. Of course, in dynasty leagues, nobody's dropping Jaden Daniels. And if you've got 12 bench spots in a deep league, sure, pick him up and stash him. It's all league dependent.
Right. And it depends if you have an IR spot. An IR spot
Right.
allows somebody that's out to sit in there. But do I think that he will return? Not, I don't think so. I think they're going to be, it's really hard for them to stay in it. I mean, they do have a bye week this week. Maybe things shake out their direction, but you're seeing Dallas play much better to close off a potential spot there. I just don't see the Commanders being in a position where they're going to risk it. And then it's probably part of the conversation of this area of the season that we're heading into is looking at some of these of, is Garrett Wilson hurt to put on IR, or is Garrett Wilson just the season is lost and you're toughing it out and we're going to just touch you down for the future? I think that some of those conversations are going to be very, very real here coming up.
And I think they kind of already soft launched the shutdown, if you will. What we heard 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago was like, yeah, he can come back after the bye. This isn't as bad as we thought. And then we got a report a couple days ago saying, the initial reports were that he could come back after the bye, but might actually need another 5 or 6 weeks to heal up here. So it sounds like the Washington beat is already kind of preparing for a shutdown. And like, frankly, I'm not the one making these decisions, but there's no reason to put Jaden Daniels out there. Like there's no upside, only downside at this point. So, yeah, if he's out there and you've got a deep bench and you want to stash him in your redraft leagues, go for it. But like anybody hoping to like make a final push as a contender and go out and trade for Jaden Daniels while he's out, I don't think that's the move you should be making in your dynasty leagues. All right, Jeff, let's go ahead and jump into the Week 12 games. We have no international games, so I don't know about you, but I'm excited to not have to be up at the crack of dawn watching football. I'm going to wake up Sunday morning, get a pot of chili going, let that simmer throughout the day, and have it for dinner on Sunday night. I'm going to enjoy my free morning that we haven't had in a while. New York Jets and Baltimore Ravens kicking off in the afternoon. As always, for people new tuning into the show, we always kind of use the injuries as a jumping off point. And in this one, all of the fantasy relevant Jets are healthy. We don't have a single wide receiver, quarterback, running back, or tight end on the injury report. Of course, we do have the news that Justin Fields is benched and we're getting a Tyrod Taylor start. So we'll break that down. For the Baltimore Ravens, we've got Rashad Bateman still not practicing with an ankle injury after he missed last week. Justice Hill is practicing in full, dealing with a toe injury, but we expect to see him out there. Rinse and repeat from last week. Lamar Jackson got the DNP on Wednesday. Everybody panicked. Full participant on Thursday. He's going to play this week. And then Isaiah Likely dealing with a calf injury. Didn't practice Wednesday, upgraded to a limited participant on Thursday. He should continue trending up. We expect to see him out here this week. But Jeff, first question I got to ask, Tyrod Taylor getting the start for the New York Jets. How does this change everything that we think we know about this Jets offense?
First off, Tyrod Taylor going up against the Baltimore Ravens. We got a hint of revenge in the air here. He was drafted by the Ravens, sat behind Joe Flacco to begin his career before moving to Buffalo to get a shot to be the starting quarterback for the Bills. So a fun narrative element with Tyrod Taylor stepping in here against the Ravens.
I want to know real quickly, are you kind of shocked that Aaron Glenn gave away his competitive advantage by letting the Ravens know who he's going to be starting this week?
Well, I think the reason why he did that is because you do want to strike fear in the Ravens and saying, this guy is out for revenge. He is out to get the franchise that never gave him the fair opportunity. And so that's probably the 3D chess that Aaron Glenn was playing there. I think when you stack it up, when you look at this passing game with Tyrod Taylor in there, you just kind of staying on schedule, probably timing, and maybe some of the opening up some of the short passing game. Looking at they utilized two tight ends heavily, a lot more last week than they had previously. Maybe that's the path to Jeremy Ruckert being involved more last week. Maybe that's the path to getting Mason Taylor unlocked a little bit as kind of that nominal slot receiver, that move tight end that. Maybe we see that with Tyrod Taylor. We saw them plug in the two wide receivers that they got at the trade deadline with John Mechie with Adonai Mitchell. The returns were much better for Mechie there. I mean, Mitchell definitely got opportunities, but definitely dropped opportunities, whereas Mechie did come through with a touchdown. I think when you're looking at the short passing game, potentially with Tyrod Taylor being unlocked, you're looking at Mason Taylor, you're looking at John Mechie, and you're hoping that there's something there with those two players. We've seen some garbage situations at the end of the year where guys come out of nowhere to become fantasy relevant. And I mean, the Jets passing game has been absolutely brutal with Justin Fields in there. We'll lose the explosion for Fields. I mean, Fields had a great fantasy day against the Patriots last week. Tyrod Taylor has a little bit of that where he can run a little bit, but I think that's mainly what the Jets are looking for. It's kind of maybe a little bit of the Cardinals conversation where what Kyler Murray is and what he's not, and what Justin Fields is and what he's not. And by plugging the veteran in there, that can be a little bit more on your schedule and gear towards what you're trying to do offensively, allows other players to develop, puts your team in position where you do go out and get that next quarterback, and some other guys feel a little bit more confident.
And it's not all that uncommon for these veterans to come in and look really good in short spurts. But I said it at base camp yesterday, like Jacoby Brissett has me asking a lot of questions about Kyler Murray. And now Davis Mills has me asking a lot of questions about CJ Stroud. And I'm sure we already have questions about Justin Fields that are probably going to be exacerbated after this week, seeing Tyrod Taylor out there. As for the running game, one of the things that we like so much about Brees Hall, we've talked about this a lot, is having this kind of a read option concept that you can run with a rushing quarterback and a running back. We saw it, Ja'Cory Cross-Kamara, his best game came with Jaden Daniels. We talk about Derrick Henry kind of, going back to the player he was playing alongside Lamar Jackson. We saw with Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts last year. There's a little bit of rushing upside in Tyrod Taylor, but he's nowhere near the rushing weapon that Justin Fields has. Him starting, does that change the outlook for Brees Hall for you at all, or are we still just kind of looking at him as one of those high-end RB2s?
I think it's tough to get him. I mean, the volume is definitely there, and it's Brees
Right.
Hall. He's been pretty excellent the last couple of weeks, and so it's definitely, I think we talked a couple of weeks ago when he wasn't traded and he wanted to be traded, that are we going to see Brees Hall shut it down? I think we've seen kind of the opposite, where maybe he's playing a little bit harder to show that he's got that value. He knows he's a pending free agent. The team has basically told him, we don't want you here anymore. So I think that is what we're getting out of Brees Hall, of pushing towards the potential for a new contract and recognizing that he needs to put together a stretch of strong football to be in the best position for his future. And, but again, you're back in running back 1, high end running back 2. You're playing him probably in most every situation that you have him. The Ravens defense has played a lot better of late, that they've got their pieces healthy now. I mean, you look statistically, if you're somebody that is inclined to that, when they had Kyle Hamilton out, when they had Roquan Smith out earlier in the season, they put up some pretty horrible things defensively. And
who'd have thought
now
that
it's one of
having
those
two best
situations
defenders is a tough hurdle to overcome.
You just have to kind of remove some things from samples sometimes, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I said that, we were talking with our buddy Colton Dodgen yesterday. He joined me on the launch pad and we were talking about Chase Brown. And I said that I was like, when I'm looking at Colton, or like looking at what Chase Brown has done this year, I want to just take that 4-game sample with Jake Brown and just throw it in the trash. Like that wasn't even real football. And sometimes you have to be willing to do that in certain instances. Let's talk about the Ravens, though. There's not a ton to talk about here. You're starting Lamar Jackson. You're starting Derrick Henry. You're starting Zay Flowers. We do have a question in the chat that I want to address, though. Isaiah Likely, Jeff, I have jokingly said over the last couple of weeks that he just feels like an industry plant. People have been gassing him up for years, and we saw that huge blow-up game week 1 last year, and that's pretty much all we've seen throughout his career. I do like the player. I like these move tight ends that get creative usage, but just hasn't really happened with Isaiah Likely. Like, do we expect this breakout to happen at some point? Like, he's still a young player, 25. We see most tight ends hitting their age apex between 27 and 29 years old. So I want to hold on for hope, but you can only keep that light on for so long before the bulb burns out.
Well, it's just with Mark Andrews there as well. And then just looking at structurally the offense, Zay Flowers has become their number 1 receiver, and everything else is kind of just around supporting Zay Flowers. You're getting the red zone involvement for Mark Andrews that makes him fantasy relevant, and Lamar Jackson's comfort in going to him in the red zone. Other than that, I mean, sure, some big plays could potentially be there. And that is the one element that's been missing, I think, from this offense relative to where we saw them last year, is just the big splash plays. Without Rashad Bateman still in this matchup, you maybe likely unlock something downfield, but I think we know what it is with Mark Andrews out of the lineup, but we know what it is with Mark Andrews in the lineup. And at the end of the day, that's what it is. I think longer term, you're looking for how long is Mark Andrews going to be with the organization, or is likely going to shake free and land in a different situation. That's really the bet that you're making in fantasy. But I mean, we've talked before about, and I think really, if you want to elevate your fantasy game, it's a lot more about learning and looking at what a team actually is doing, instead of just wish casting and deciding that if you were the coach or the general manager, these are the things that you would be doing. There's not a lot of relevance in that.
Mark Andrews is on the final year of his contract, and we're going to be watching this closely to kind of see how this shakes out here. It feels like he's been around forever, but it's just because he came into the league and was an immediate producer. So, still 29 years old. Like, that is not old for a tight end. We regularly see 29-year-old tight ends getting 3, 4, 5-year extensions here. So will be really interesting to see if they want to extend him or not, because I think that there is a good symbiotic relationship here between what Isaiah Likely does and what Mark Andrews does. Mark Andrews can play that inline role. Isaiah Likely can kind of kick out wide a little bit every now and then. They can both occupy the slot when needed. But I think that there is a complementary skill set there that they like and they want to continue nurturing. I don't think Mark Andrews is going to get that massive payday that he was probably hoping for at 29, but we'll see if he's willing to take a home team discount to stay here with the Ravens. Jeff, any final takeaways on this matchup before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of numbers to talk about here on the Ravens
Love
side
numbers.
because
Let's hear them.
yeah, so we have it's fun that these two teams are playing this week because Derek Mason was a player that played for both the Jets and the Ravens. And last week, Mark Andrews topped Derek Mason as the Ravens all-time career receiving yards leader. He can get there to Derek Mason is the franchise record holder for receptions. Andrews needs 4 more catches to tie Derek Mason's Ravens record for receptions.
Wow.
We've had DeAndre Hopkins working on last week. We saw Davante Adams go over 1,000 career receptions, and we've had DeAndre Hopkins has kind of been working on that all year long, and he's been started the year in a range where prime DeAndre Hopkins might have got it in week 1. We're in week 12 now. He needs 3 more catches to get to 1,000 in his career. He has kind of taken over as that wide receiver 2 nominally on the field without Rashad Bateman in the lineup.
Right.
Yeah, but the explosion hasn't been there. The ability down, it's just we're in that stage of DeAndre Hopkins' career where he's on the field because he knows what he's supposed to be doing. His body's not able to do the things that it used to be able to do, and so you kind of run into those situations sometimes. Lamar Jackson needs three rushing touchdowns, which would be a big day, but 3 rushing touchdowns to become second place on the Ravens' all-time career rushing touchdown list.
Who would that be behind?
That would be behind Jamal Lewis. So
that's what I thought.
Yeah, Jamal Lewis is way out in front, but he would tie Ray Rice. So he's 37 is what he would get to tie Ray Rice, and then Jamal Lewis has 45.
Wow. All right. Well, I mean, I'd say I'd bet the over on Lamar hitting 45 career rushing touchdowns. Let's just hope that's all with the Ravens.
It's really fun because he's on pace. He should become the Ravens all-time leader in every passing category, but also every rushing category. And that's going to be a rare thing to be the franchise leader in both rushing across the board and then passing as well.
Before we move on to the next game, we got another question in the chat here, Jeff. Pull up your quarterback rankings because we got Fantasy Meatball asking us if he should start Tyrod Taylor or Geno Smith this week. I mean, assuming this is a super flex league, I do have Tyrod Taylor at quarterback 21, Geno Smith at quarterback 25. So I prefer Tyrod Taylor slightly just because of the rushing upside there. Not sure where you land on this one.
I have Taylor at quarterback 23 and Geno Smith at quarterback 24. And I think Geno Smith, we'll get to it, but we saw that Dallas matchup last week, and that raises a lot of questions in terms of, did the Cowboys actually improve their defense at the deadline because adding Quinnen Williams and their corners are getting healthy, or is it just not going to be there at all for fantasy for Geno Smith this year?
Yeah, I mean, worst EPA per dropback in the NFL right now, Geno Smith. This entire Ravens team has just been absolutely atrocious. We knew it was going to be fun with Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly and Geno Smith and Tyler Lockett running it all back, but it just has not worked out. We'll see what they do going into 2026. Let's move on to the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Chicago Bears. Jeff, I made this joke on the launch pad yesterday, but Aaron Rodgers could be 65 and in a wheelchair, and if he came rolling out onto Soldier Field, I'd start to sweat a little bit. And here he is, with a broken wrist, 41 years old. This feels like it should be a game where the Bears have been running hot and they've been pulling out these wins and they're confident and they're feeling themselves. And I just expect Aaron Rodgers to come in here and just completely deflate the Bears. But let's talk about some of the injuries here. Aaron Rodgers, as I mentioned, left wrist injury. He didn't practice on Wednesday, limited on Thursday. Said he feels like he could play, and we know he's a competitor, and there's probably a little bit of extra motivation to come in here and play in Chicago. Jaylen Warren didn't practice Wednesday, but he was limited on Thursday. Jonnu Smith, just a typical rest day on Wednesday. We see that for him often. For the Bears, it is only running backs that are injured this week. DeAndre Swift, though, practiced in full yesterday. He's been dealing with that hip injury for a while now. No major concerns. Roshan Johnson, now dealing with a thumb injury, has yet to practice this week. It is just one thing after another with Roshan Johnson. I don't know if we're going to see anything come of him this year. And then Travis Homer didn't practice on Thursday. Not super notable as he's mostly been on special teams, but we did see him come in for a handful of touches last week. So this will just condense the usage between DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai. But let's start with Aaron Rodgers here, Jeff. I think that's where we need to start the discussion. We talked a lot earlier in the week about kind of the complexities of this offense, how they might change if we see Mason Rudolph out there as opposed to Aaron Rodgers. And I think that Aaron Rodgers is, going to be a little bit better of a matchup for the Bears defenses and like better for what the Steelers want. I don't think a power run game with Mason Rudolph is what the Steelers want to do. They want to be able to hit those short, quick passes that Aaron Rodgers can evade the pressure, get the ball in his playmakers' hands quickly. And I think that that's probably what the Steelers are hoping for, is that they get Aaron Rodgers in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, he's their starting quarterback, and
Right.
he has really, they're 6-4. They are in first place in that division. They want their guy out there for. I think this is a fun matchup that maybe people don't always necessarily think about, because we're old enough that, in my mind, the Bears and the Steelers at some level are tied together, because there's been a bunch of guys that have, like, like Allen Robinson played for both, or like Jeff
Cordell
Graham when I
Stewart.
was like younger, Cordell Stewart. It's just one of those of, like, sometimes I feel like they're between the AFC and NFC. It's like sister city almost, of like sister franchise almost, of like,
Yep.
there's just some fun crossovers here in a matchup that I feel like these teams should play more often than what they do, given the way the schedule works out. I mean, Aaron Rodgers going against the Bears has really been one of those things. He's owned the Bears in his career, so you'd have to believe that there's a comfort level here going into Soldier Field. So that's fun to watch. And
He addressed it too. He knows. He's like, I've had a lot of good Sundays and Mondays and Thursdays in that stadium. He knows.
Yeah, I'm working on here to see, but to see if my hunch is correct, and it is. Most career touchdowns against any franchise, Aaron Rodgers against the Bears, 64 career touchdowns. So,
Unreal.
it's one of those. Second is the Vikings with 60, and then of course the Lions would be third with 54. So yeah, Rodgers' short passing game, I mean, unpredictable where it's going to go. Darnell Washington seems to be coming on pretty strong there, but again, it's this overall ceiling, and that's the concern of all the Steelers pass catchers. You're just touchdown dependent on any Steelers pass catcher that you put into your lineup.
So we got a question about Darnell Washington. Before we get to that, did you see the quote with Darnell Washington on the St. Brown Brothers podcast, where they asked him about his weight? Darnell Washington listed at 264 pounds, and they were kind of pressing him a little bit. And they're like, come on, man. Like, we know you're not 264 pounds. And he goes, I don't know how much I weigh. And Equanimous called him out. He goes, BS, you got weekly weigh-ins. He goes, tell us. And he goes, all right, I'll be honest. 311 pounds. You've got a 311 pound tight end out here just bullying dudes on a weekly basis. And we've seen, like, the Steelers, they love playing out of these 13 personnel packages where they can get that off balance line. They'll line up all three tight ends on the left side here, and you don't know if the ball's going to Jonnu or Pat Fryermuth or Darnell Washington. I think all of these guys kind of fall into that tight end streamer discussion, but Darnell Washington has been coming on strong over these last few weeks. And, like, I don't know how you could watch Darnell Washington catch and run with the football and not just, like, be instantly enamored. Like, it is just fun to watch.
It
It's
absolutely
like a
is fun.
mascot halftime game out there.
Yeah, it's I early in the season I made the comparison to Eric Green, Steelers tight end from. We're talking about all the '90s here. The Bears and Steelers are going to bring the '90s out of me, but we're talking about like that, and yeah, it is very fun. We saw season high in snaps last week for Darnell Washington, and it's just one of those different players that you can create these matchups because teams aren't used to seeing a player like this week to week. And so when they get into that situation, it just brings different elements to the field, and it's an ascending player. But again, we're concerned about volume. I think with any of these Steelers pass catchers, we just haven't seen spike high volume games. In my target report this week, I looked at it as there's been 7 different players that have led the Steelers in targets in a game, and 6 different players have led the Steelers in receiving yards in a game. So it's kind of where you're stacking up to this team.
Anything else you want to take away from this? Well, we haven't talked about the Bears at all. Of course, we need to talk about the Bears. First of all, I will say I was thinking about this last night, and I said it to my wife. If Caleb Williams can do what he's done over the last few weeks, this last minute miraculous game-winning touchdown, and then throw out the discount double check celebration, they'll put a statue up in front of Soldier Field Monday morning. Like, that's the way to really win over the fan base here. But what are you going to be watching specifically in this game, Jeff? I think the big thing, like, we kind of know where Roman Dunze is, wide receiver 2. We know where DJ Moore is, kind of a wide receiver 4. Luther Burden, though, he kind of took that role from Olamide Zaccheaus last week. We saw him with a season high / career high in snaps, in targets. I don't think we're at the point where we can trust him in lineups yet, but we're at least at the point where even like in your shallow redraft leagues, he should be picked up and stashed in case he does become that late season league winning rookie.
Yeah, I think this week we would lose our license to talk about fantasy football if we don't mention Luther Bird and takeover season, because it seems to be. But if you desperately need those 7.4 PPR points, absolutely lock Luther Bird into that lineup. But yeah, I think the overall volume is definitely a question concern. You get the feeling the Bears, kind of both of these teams, need this game badly, because the
Yeah.
Bears, you're coming out of this game, you go to Philadelphia next week, you go to Green Bay the week after that, you do get Cleveland, but then you finish up with Green Bay, San Francisco, and Detroit. So it's one of those. I think it's last night was interesting, and just kind of because you see the Texans coming on, and you see some of these teams that were written off early in the season are really coming on strong, and some of these other teams that got off to stronger starts are. The Bears are not one. The Bears have been, they've won. They started out 0-2 and they've won everything else but that Baltimore game. But going into that difficult stretch of the season, you've got to stack up these wins. And for the Steelers too, with the Ravens now winning 3 in a row, that's another situation where the Ravens felt like everybody was ready to write them off. They're just one game back. They've won 3 in a row. Lamar Jackson there. I mean, we would expect they beat the Jets, so the Steelers need to keep pace with that. It's really one. And unfortunately, we know how these narratives work coming out of these games. Whoever loses this game, it's going to be 5-alarm panic fire, even if they're still in first place in their division. But that's kind of where we stand, I think, with this game.
And then I think for the Bears running backs, we know we're starting DeAndre Swift as a high-end RB2. Kyle Mononga just falls into that, like, hey, I'm desperate. I was hoping to flex Jamar Chase or Drake London, and now I need somebody that I hope can stumble into the end zone. And that's really all you're hoping for with Kyle Mononga. The passing volume hasn't been there. Just the overall volume hasn't been there, but it does seem like when they get inside the 10-yard line, there isn't a pass rate at all. Like once they get inside the 10-yard line, they are just going to pound the ball with Kyle Mononga until they get in there. So this to me, I mean, like, it was so easy to make the preseason comp that like Kyle Mononga could be the Jamal Williams in this offense. I don't know if he's got the 15 touchdown upside, but that's exactly what he is. Like he is Jamal Williams in this offense.
He absolutely is. And we know Ben Johnson's comfortable utilizing 2 backs. I mean, it definitely swung hard back to DeAndre Swift. He's the lead back. He's the clear lead back
100%.
here. And Mononga is that flex territory for desperate, but you need a touchdown or you need Swift to miss some time to really feel like you should have Mononga in your lineup.
Last thing I'll say about Swift, I've been very hard on Swift throughout his career. He's doing a lot of things that he didn't do early in his career now. Like I see him getting downhill quickly. I see him running through defenders, playing with a little bit more tenacity over this season than I have seen historically. So, you can't every once in a while teach an old dog a new trick. Let's move on to the next one here, Jeff. New England Patriots at Cincinnati Bengals. Patriots have been red hot, but that is not going to be the major story here. We'll get into it. Ramondre Stevenson dealing with a toe injury, has been limited in practice. He said he expects to return this week. Terrell Jennings practicing in full. Kayshon Boutte practicing in full. Austin Hooper practicing in full as well. So a lot of injuries on the report for the Patriots, but it seems like they're all going to play. Of course, the big story this week is Joe Burrow practicing in full. I don't think anybody expected that. Mike Gesicki is also back at practice, had his 21-day practice window open coming off of IR. Samaje Perine still not practicing. So to me, like this feels so similar to last year, where the second half of the season, Bengals back up against the wall. All the other running backs behind Chase Brown are hurt. It feels like we're just about to replay what we saw over the second half of last year, where Joe Burrow is, one of the top scoring quarterbacks in fantasy. Chase Brown isn't coming off the field. He becomes a league winner. Is that kind of what we're looking at here with the Bengals, Jeff?
Yeah, we're seeing what we got with Joe Burrow here, and we talk about the situation, just talked about the AFC North with the Ravens sitting one game back from the Steelers. Our buddy Luke Sawhook was kind of like, why are they activating Joe Burrow? But the Bengals are 3 games back from first place for the Steelers. They play the Steelers
North is wide open.
They've already played the Steelers. I'm sorry. They split those games. So that tiebreaker is split with the Steelers. They play the Ravens twice still. So the 3 games with 7 games to go. And if you plug Joe Burrow back in, you can kind of roll with it. But we did talk about the situation with Jaden Daniels, and the Bengals probably look at this Patriots game saying, this is it. This is our season right here. We had expectations coming into this year. We were disappointed coming off of last year. We need to take this game to really feel like we have a shot for the rest of the season. And if not, then maybe you do start to have that conversation of where is Joe Burrow's health? Where's the decision going to be the rest of this year? We had our friend Dan Hendry on the DFS show last night. And it was great timing because I think there is a lot to unpack with this Bengals team right now in this particular moment. But Dan made the point that Joe Flacco's been pretty good in coming in. And so how much more are you going to get of just missing a lot of time with Joe Burrow, and the real issues aren't going to be solved by bringing Joe Burrow in. And that's primarily this poor defense.
Well, I think, and we might miss some of it because of the toe injury that could zap some of his rushing upside. But I think that's the one element that you get with Joe Burrow. I mean, you're getting a lot of elements with Joe Burrow that you aren't getting with Joe Flacco, but I think one of the most obvious ones is that there's scrambling ability. And we have seen Joe Burrow is a master at avoiding sacks. So even though they have this porous offensive line, Joe Burrow is really good at sliding around in the pocket, moving, evading that pressure. Joe Flacco is willing to take those sacks a little bit. I mean, he checks down more often than he takes a sack, but I think that that's the thing that we're getting with Joe Burrow, is that he can extend plays. And when you get a quarterback who can extend plays with wide receivers like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, who if you give them an extra 2 seconds, they're going to find open field. I think that's where we really see the magic happen with this Bengals offense.
Well, and really what we're getting, I think even at a different element, what you're getting with Joe Burrow is the guy that you're punting the ball to him when you're up 3 or 4 with 3 minutes left in the game, and you're going to feel a lot different in that situation than when Joe Flacco's on the other sideline.
Yeah, and I also see a lot, I even see it in the comments right now, and I don't want to call anybody out specifically, but I do see a lot of like, why would he come back to this 3-8 team? We already talked about it. Like the AFC North is open; they can still potentially win this division. But this is also like, this is a team that has been together for years. Like, this Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Chase Brown, these guys have been doing this together a long time. I think there's an element of Joe Burrow just saying like, I just want to get out there and play with my buddies again. Like, we know like Joe Burrow's got that dog in him. He is a fierce and loyal competitor. And I think he just wants to play. If his toe wasn't injured, there would be no question about Joe Burrow out here. Like, we wouldn't be shutting down a healthy Joe Burrow. And right now he's practicing in full, and he said his toe feels fine. So in my opinion, he should be out there.
He absolutely should be out there. And yeah, practicing in full, says his toe feels fine. There's no reason not to have him out there. And it's a long off season. It's a long off season. The expectations around the Bengals to just pack it in and not even try at the end of the year. I mean, you just have to fire what is left in that gun and give it a shot, because we know that if the Bengals were to get into the playoffs with Joe Burrow healthy, with Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins, I mean, nobody really wants to see that, I think, wild card weekend of coming into their stadium.
Exactly. For the New England Patriots, I think I don't know where you want to talk. We need to talk about the backfield, but I think the first thing I want to talk about is Stephon Diggs. It's now a full-time player. Like, we have been talking about this all season long, Jeff, that if you look at what Stephon Diggs, what he has been doing on a per route run basis, he has been truly elite. Like, he is 4th in the league in yards per route run. It's Jackson Smith-Njigba, Puka Nacua, Drake London, and Stephon Diggs. The issue has been that Stephon Diggs hasn't been running a lot of routes. He led the team in routes last week. He had a season-high snap share as well. And I think this is just him now being, 13 months removed from that ACL tear. It may have taken him a little bit of time at age 31 to get back up to 100%. But to me, Stephon Diggs looks like vintage Stephon Diggs right now. And, I threw around the term yesterday on the launch pad with Colton, said that to me, he feels like a potential league winner.
Oh, he's definitely there. He's been excellent ever since that week 3 game against Buffalo, or week 4 game against Buffalo. He's been phenomenal, and he's really unlocked a lot of things. I think you've seen Mac Hollins has come on very strong over the last month, and he's been a wide receiver fantasy wide receiver 3 over the last month. And so you're starting to have the pieces fall in place. So there were a lot of questions around this Patriots receiver room coming into the season, and a lot of different pieces. Now we kind of think we have a pretty good idea of where it's all going to land. Kayshon Boutte, if he's going to be active or not, that's probably the biggest question here on the Patriots side in terms of receivers. But Diggs, you got to feel good given what you spent and invested in him to see what he's done so far this season.
And then I think we need to talk about the backfield as well. And I was on Harris Football yesterday with our good friend Chris Harris, who is a unabashed Patriots fan. And, he's been doing this for decades, and he's got some connections with the Patriots beat, and couldn't give me specifics. But what he told me is that, like, if Ramondre Stevenson is active, Travion managers are TreVeyon Henderson managers are going to be frustrated with the amount of touches from Ramondre Stevenson. Now, that doesn't shock me at all. Like, we know how Josh McDaniels likes to deploy his running backs. We saw Terrell Jennings getting frustratingly involved a couple of weeks ago. I do think, though, that we've seen enough that maybe the table has flipped a little bit, where Ramondre was the preferred option before his bye. I do think that there is a cat out of the bag element here with TreVeyon Henderson. Like, we have seen, like, Mike Vrabel over the last couple of weeks has been gushing about him, where early in the season it was a lot of, he needs to work on his consistency, he needs to shore up his pass blocking. And now we hear him saying, like, he's looked spectacular, he's blocking well, he's doing all the right things. To me, I expect this still to be a split, but where it was maybe like a 60-40 in favor of Ramondre Stevenson, now I'm thinking we'd probably see closer to like a 65-35 in favor of Henderson. And of course, we're just like pulling numbers out of thin air here. Neither of us really know, but what are your expectations for this backfield going forward?
So I will say that given this week, I don't really care, because they're playing against the Bengals and you're firing up
both of them,
TreVeyon Henderson, across the board. We're going to learn something coming out of this game. But if they're going against the Patriots defense, which is the best against the league in against running backs, yeah, I mean, you could have that conversation of like, is there going to be enough there? Against the Bengals, you're firing that gun. You're not putting TreVeyon Henderson in the bench on any situation. We again talked about it on the DFS show last night with Dan and with Phil Alexander, but it's really, I think it's in your GPPs, it's probably a gift here with this to have the questions around Ramondre Stevenson in this matchup with TreVeyon Henderson, because had Stevenson not been returning to active, every single DFS lineup would have TreVeyon Henderson in it. Now you can potentially play him in large field tournaments with low rostership percentages. And that's kind of where I stand there. I do want to hit some numbers real quick on the Bengals side, because Chase Brown has hit 100 scrimmage yards in 4 consecutive games. One more game with 100 scrimmage yards would tie a team record that he set last year that he holds with 3 other players. We've got 4 consecutive touchdowns for T. Higgins coming into this game, and we didn't talk about T. Higgins, and that should be heavy volume there for Higgins. I know there's some concern about a Christian Gonzalez matchup, but we did see Drake London go for 3 touchdowns against this Patriots defense not that long ago.
Let me say, though, I think the difference is Drake London moves all over the formation. Like, they use him in pre-snap motion to get him out from under that shadow. We don't see T. Higgins ever really move to the slot. So I think that's the difference here, is like, T. Higgins is kind of glued to the outside, so I think Christian Gonzalez is going to be on him, and the only reason I want to mention this up, because we didn't mention a name that I am kind of looking at as like one of my favorite streamers this week, which is Andre Yosevach with no Jamar Chase. We did just kind of skip over that entirely. I forgot about the Jamar Chase suspension. So I think with Christian Gonzalez being on T. Higgins, I'm still firing him up. Like, T. Higgins is inside my top 10 wide receivers, but Andre Yosevach inside my top 30 receivers this week as well.
So that's the other. Well, Higgins, if he gets just a touchdown in this game, he's got touchdowns. I believe it's either 8 or 9 games, and I should know what the exact number is, but he has tied an NFL record for, this is the most like fantasy number possible, but touchdowns in consecutive home games. He has tied Jerry Rice, and there's one other player. Again, I should know that other player is, but he has tied those players for the longest streak of touchdowns in consecutive home games. On your Yoshiva's point, again, we had Dan Hendry on last night. You're losing Jamar Chase in this lineup, and Dan is a very, very sharp analyst, but Dan's also a Bengals fan. Dan knows this team very, very well. Mitchell Tinsley is the name that Dan brought up, because Mitchell Tinsley and Joe Burrow, there's just been a mind meld between those two. Joe Burrow went to bat for Tinsley to be on the field, to be on the roster this preseason. We saw Tinsley splash in the preseason. Tinsley made a big play last week. Tinsley, I think, might be the more interesting name, and that's the direction that Dan was going, that he kind of doesn't, I don't know that necessarily thinks that.
Are you going that way in DFS where he is significantly cheaper, or like for people who are looking for a streamer in their dynasty and redraft leagues, would you still go Tinsley over Yosevach?
So Dan didn't explicitly say it, but the vibe that I got from Dan was that he doesn't really expect Yoshivash's role to change all that much. And Yoshivash is kind of one of those Alan Lazard type of receivers, of brings a lot of on the field without touching the ball. Whereas, DFS play, but also I think your deep leagues, when you're looking for somebody to plug into a matchup, Tinsley should be on the radar there.
Any other takeaways from this game, Jeff? I think we covered it all at this point. Anything else you'd like to talk about here?
Yeah, just seeing probably what the Bengals offense can do, plugging in Burrow versus this strong Patriots defense, or seeing if the Patriots keep this rolling because they have been the hottest team in football.
On to the next game, we got the New York Giants at Detroit Lions. Darius Slayton didn't practice Wednesday, but he was limited Thursday, so trending in the right direction to play through this hamstring injury. Jackson Dart, limited with a concussion, but it sounds like he is going to be ready to play this week. And then for the Detroit Lions, nothing major here. We got Isaac Tesla practicing in a limited fashion through an oblique injury. But Jeff, I think the first thing I want to talk about here is regarding Jackson Dart. So much ado was made about how he was leading the league in designed rushes for quarterbacks. A lot of people are saying that that's what Brian Daboll got fired for. Now, you can only clip a quarterback's wings so much. Like, the quarterback's going to go out there and do what he wants to do. But do you think that now with Mike Kafka being the head coach, and I know he was the play caller beforehand, but being the head coach now, do you think that maybe in a desperate move to try to protect his job a little bit, do you think that maybe we see fewer designed rushing attempts for Jackson Dart in this matchup?
Yeah, I think it's coming off the concussion. Is probably the biggest concern there on preserving his health and making sure he can get through this first game back is probably
majorly. Yeah.
What's that?
The optics of it too. Like, we got that report about, being evaluated 4 times, missing some time with this concussion. I think that, like, just from a PR standpoint, like, they want to keep him from getting hit in the head in this game.
Exactly. And so, yeah, if you're going to remove the rushing element from Jackson Dart's case, I think he still will run with the ball, and they still has a very good odds of getting into the end zone because that's what he's been doing. But this Lions defense was one that we wanted to target at the end of last year because of the injuries just left them decimated, shootout game scripts. This Lions defense has been pretty strong all year long and is kind of, I think you probably have to exercise some caution here. I mean, Dart, in most situations, Superflex, you're for sure playing him one quarterback. Then it starts to become a conversation relative to what else you have that you can go in here. I mean, you can talk yourself into and make the Lions offense gets right against a Giants defense, and then that allows the Giants to be chasing a little bit. But I think they have to balance that out with concern about Dart and kind of less design runs.
Let me just put your stamp on it, Jeff. Jackson Dart has 7 rushing touchdowns in the last 7 games. Are we going into next week saying that Jackson Dart has 8 rushing touchdowns in his last 8 games?
Yes, because I think that Dart just gets around that end zone, and at some level, there's I think there's young Josh Allen in Jackson Dart's game. Like, I'm still going for it. So I think that if I were the type of person that were to look at a touchdown, and maybe if I put any time on top of that touchdown, Jackson Dart and Theo Johnson, I think from the Giants side, are probably the 2 most interesting options there.
Theo Johnson has been a touchdown machine since Jackson Dart took over, so I think that's a solid bet right there. The other thing I want to talk about regarding the Giants is the backfield here. A lot of people saw the 2 touchdowns last week from Devin Singletary and think that there is like this very annoying split here, when the reality of the situation tells a very different story. Tyrone Tracy handled 23 touches last week. I mean, we're looking at, it's about a 65-35 split here. Of course, Singletary got the goal line work. He got the touchdowns. But Tyrone Tracy, like, he's still a player that we want to put in our flex spot in fantasy, right? Even if the touchdowns weren't there last week.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this Lions defense has been good, so that is probably a concern. But I think Tracy's there for a flex play. I think some of what Singletary had 10 red zone opportunities last week. That's kind of an insane number, and I think some of it was having Dart out of the lineup, and they were doing some wildcat things with Singletary. I think that in some level they were trying to use him as a proxy for Dart not being there. So I think Singletary, if you're absolutely desperate, he could be one of those if you've got a 0 RB build or something like that, or you're just kind of hit with buys this week or something, that if you wanted to desperately plug Singletary in, that is in play, because we've seen him splash, make some big plays in the passing game a couple weeks ago, have the touchdowns last week. So there's been some moments, but Tracy does stand as the clear option that you want to hear out of these Giants players.
Another question we're going to talk about, let's flip over to the Detroit Lions, and I shared this with you yesterday, but Jeff, since week 6, Jameson Williams is outscoring Amon-Ra St. Brown, and in that sample, we even have a 0-point game from Jameson Williams. I mean, we have talked about this a lot since Dan Campbell took over play calling here. I mean, that's just been over the last 2 weeks where we've seen these huge Jameson Williams blow-up spots, but even before he took over, we started to see him heating up a little bit. We saw some of the big plays back. I mean, he is the wide receiver 2 in scoring since they have come out of their bye here. How excited are we getting about Jameson Williams down the stretch? You talked about this, like it feels reminiscent to last year, right? Like they need to win. They've got all of these indoor games. To me, like Jameson Williams is starting to look like a wide receiver 1. And I talked about this with Colton Dodson yesterday, and I said, give me the full list of wide receivers that you would prefer ahead of Jameson Williams rest of the season. And it was a very, very short list that didn't include names like Nico Collins and Justin Jefferson in it.
Yeah, so we don't have Sam Laporta in the lineup, so there's
Right.
not that concern about spreading targets through these 3 main receivers. You really distill it down, and Jameson Williams, Dan Campbell, he kind of hinted around it, but he made the comment of knowing how to use his personnel, and I think that Jameson Williams, there's a thought that, that vertical speed, let's use him to stretch the field. But I think with Jameson Williams, we've talked last week about horizontal speed and getting the ball in his hands and stressing defenses in that way and allowing maybe an Isaac Tisla to be that guy that can push downfield to open up. But I think Williams, Dan Campbell calling the plays, knows how to utilize Williams, and they're really getting him going. And this is the crux of our argument that we made prior to the season when we were pretty aggressive and bullish on Jameson Williams relative to Amon-Ra St. Brown, that you don't have to have a PhD in watching football to see the difference of these two players when they put the ball
Right.
in Jameson Williams' hands with the ability to create. I mean, he's different than most everybody else in the NFL with this ball in his hands with the ability to create.
Yeah, and I mean, Jared Goff said it himself that those crossing patterns to Jameson Williams are unguardable. And truly, like every single time they throw a crossing route to Jameson Williams, it just seems like an automatic 30, 40 yards. Like that's just what he does when he gets the ball in his hand. I think another thing, too, with the loss of Sam Laporta is that Amon-Ra St. Brown, for all the things that he does well, what flies under the radar is his ability as a blocker. Like he is phenomenal. It's just like cracking these linebackers. Like you'll see him like go in pre-snap motion and then come up through the A gap and be a lead blocker for the running backs. Like he is phenomenal in that respect. So I do wonder too, without Sam Laporta for the next few weeks, we could see more blocking reps from Amon-Ra St. Brown, focusing more on Jameson Williams as the receiver. And we don't need a huge change in usage. Like that's what we said. Like you get an extra target per game to Jameson Williams. That's the difference between what he did last year as the wide receiver 19 in fantasy football and being a top 5 wide receiver. So yeah, down the stretch, Jameson Williams looking like he could get hot and help people win their leagues here. The other change that we've seen since Dan Campbell has taken over as the play caller is a much heavier dose of David Montgomery. However, these extra touches for David Montgomery seem to just allow Jahmyr Gibbs to play out there with fresher legs, where we're seeing huge explosive plays from Jahmyr Gibbs over these last couple of weeks. So to me, like, yeah, you said Dan Campbell said that he knows how to use his personnel. And I think he is just running a masterclass right now in how to get Jameson Williams involved and how to utilize him, how to split the touches up between these running backs. I know last week was a little bit weird that against that good Philadelphia defense, but I have a lot more faith in this Lions offense going forward than we did earlier in the season.
Yeah, Dan Campbell taking over play calling is the natural place to go on all these things. It's only been 6 quarters, so I think that
No,
you know,
he 8 quarters.
6
He
quarters.
was
He took it over at halftime of the Commanders game. I thought he did that
no,
whole
he
Commanders game. Well,
he
because
did the whole
Jameson Williams
he did,
didn't do anything in the first half of that Commanders game. So for all
yeah,
saying it's all Dan Campbell unlocking it, he didn't unlock it in the first
it
half
was
of that
yeah,
Commanders
there
game.
there were a few targets in the first half, but it didn't work out. But Dan Campbell, they can't switch play callers mid-game. He went into the game. What it is, Dan Campbell is just a very magnanimous gentleman. He didn't want to have this media circus about stealing play calling from John Morton, but it was people started speculating about it early in the game because he had the play sheet. And typically, like we always see him with a play sheet, but people started to connect the dots. They asked him about it in that, coming out of halftime interview. And that's where he admitted that he had taken over the play calling, but it was the full last 2 games.
Well, I apologize then because I had thought it was the type of thing of at halftime he said I got this
No,
like
no, no.
so no, but it's Amon-Ra St. Brown. We saw last week he became the first player since Josh Doxson in 2017 to have 12 targets or more and 2 receptions or less. So that wasn't a very good efficiency. I think last week you just got to throw it out. I mean, this was a bad weather game. We know what Jared Goff is on the road in bad weather against a Eagles defense that's really peaking. In verse having this game against the Giants, everything gets right here. But Amon-Ra St. Brown needs 4 catches to hit 500 in his career. He would become the youngest player to hit 500 receptions in his career. And
Wow.
that's actually a record that Justin Jefferson had tied Larry Fitzgerald in September in that record. Amon-Ra St. Brown is lined up to beat that, but then also Jamar Chase is lined up to break it too, because Jamar Chase is a little bit younger than these guys and he's coming right up behind them too. So just kind of some things to watch here, some records to watch.
Yeah, I mean, we see these guys just coming out of college and just like hit the ground running immediately nowadays. Let's move on to the next game though here, Jeff.
Just on David Montgomery, just one more quick point. Dan Campbell did say that he needs to use David Montgomery a little bit more. A little bit concerned because the actual good part about the Giants is that defensive line, and we've seen that Lions interior struggle with blocking at some moments. They've replaced those two guards, and so it should hypothetically be here for Montgomery to get in the end zone a time or two. But I think this is definitely a matchup that the weakness of the Giants is in that pass defense, those defensive backs, and that's the way I would expect the Lions to attack them.
And I think at home, this is one where we can see like just a vintage Detroit game where they hang like 35 points in the first half. Like this is a very beatable Giants secondary, and I think that the Lions are starting to feel themselves, even coming off of a weird Week 11 game. Let's go to the Minnesota Vikings at Green Bay Packers. Aaron Jones revenge game, and he's practicing in full through that shoulder injury. So excited to see what he can do. I'm sure he'll have a little bit of extra motivation. That's the only real notable injury for the Vikings. For the Packers, though, we have a slew of injuries, as has been the storyline all year for Green Bay. Josh Jacobs didn't practice on Wednesday, limited on Thursday, dealing with this knee injury, which we will absolutely discuss. The wide receivers are so banged up. We got Romeo Doubs practicing limited. We've got Christian Watson with his knee injury. He's limited. Dontavian Wicks with a calf injury. He's limited. Savion Williams didn't practice on Wednesday, was limited Thursday with a foot injury. Matthew Golden is also limited, dealing with a shoulder and a wrist injury. And then we've got Jordan Love. He's on the injury report, practicing in full with a left shoulder injury, so no major concerns there. But Jeff, I think the first thing we need to talk about here is Josh Jacobs, where the initial concern was a potential PCL sprain, which could have put him out for, upwards of 6 weeks, potentially the rest of the fantasy season. But what we hear instead is him just kind of taking shots at the MetLife turf, saying that what it sounds like is that he went down and this has happened to me before. This actually just happened to me in the gym a couple of weeks ago, where I banged my knee and like within a split second, it swelled up so big that I couldn't move my knee. And it was terrifying. Like I thought that I just like ruptured something in my knee. Swelling went down over a couple of days and there was like no pain, but it was just this weird swelling. And it sounds like that's what Josh Jacobs is dealing with. He said he went down. He said his knee swelled up. He had no range of motion. And he said every day the swelling is going down. He expects to be out there, but we'll have much better understandings after today, Friday's practice report comes out.
Dave, one of my favorite things is when you compare your old man workout injuries to elite NFL athlete injuries. So, I get it. So, yeah, I hear you.
We all have bodies, okay? And I dropped a barbell, it hit my knee, and my knee, I'm not kidding, it ballooned up. Like it was the scariest
Are you
thing.
okay, Dave? We need to send in somebody got checked
okay
out.
the next day, and that's what I'm saying. Like it looked like the immediate reaction. I've never seen anything hit my leg, and within seconds, it just swelled up like a balloon. And then the next day, it was back to normal. Like it was a little bit stiff. Within 3 days, I was back to 100%. It was a scary looking injury, and that's exactly what Josh Jacobs said. Is that like he hit his knee? He said it swelled up. He said he couldn't move his leg, and that's why he couldn't play. And I mean, we saw clips from practice yesterday on Thursday where he looked like Josh Jacobs. He was running routes. He was cutting. Like it didn't look like there were any limitations. So for all these people who blew all their fab on Emmanuel Wilson, I mean, it probably looks less than 50% likely that Josh Jacobs isn't going to play this week. I expect him to be out there.
Yeah, Jacobs is kind of moving into we had talked about DeAndre Hopkins previously. It's just one of these Jacobs feels like he's become one of those guys that Josh Jacobs got hit by a truck on his way to the game today, but he's active, he's ready to go. It's just like we've had been sickness, we've had different injuries. I mean, everybody's getting banged up in the NFL, but we've had Josh Jacobs. It feels like the world can end and nothing else is going on. And Josh Jacobs Sunday at 1 p.m. is going to be standing in that Packers backfield, ready to go. You talk about
only had a handful of injuries in his career, and like knock on wood, he's never had a serious injury. Like he's played 13 plus games every single year of his career. That's unheard of for a running back. This dude is like one of the few like true Ironmans at the position.
Yeah, and you talk about blowing fab on Emmanuel Wilson. I mean, he should have been rostered in most
Right.
every league. We've made that point. And so, yeah, you could spiral on if you blew fab and then Jacobs does play. But at the same time, again, we know that there's been some things that have popped up throughout this year for Jacobs. And so you do still hypothetically have that guy that's an injury away, and he might already be a couple injuries into the situation that, it's worth having Wilson on your roster. You don't need to freak out that you're not going to be able to plug him in this week potentially, but yeah, I think it's Jacobs is going to be there.
Yeah. And then let's just talk hypothetically. We don't have to spend a whole ton of time here, but if Jacobs doesn't play, my initial gut reaction was like, Emmanuel Wilson's looked really good and he's going to be the guy. And we can just like project him for like 80% of what Josh Jacobs does. But then I thought about it a little bit more. This Vikings defense is very, very blitz heavy. And we know the way to beat this blitz is to throw these quick little checkdowns. And Chris Brooks is a guy who comes in and does a lot of pass catching. We know it's in Matt LaFleur's DNA to have a split backfield. He's bucked that trend over the last couple of years with Josh Jacobs. So in the hypothetical world where Josh Jacobs doesn't play, my immediate reaction was to just like rank Emmanuel Wilson as a top 20 running back. Now, the more I think about it, and maybe this is just, paralysis by overanalyst, but like as I think about it, I do worry that we're going to see more of a split approach here where Chris Brooks would come in and handle 30-40% of the touches, which would just kind of push them both into that like frustrating RB3 category.
I think that you're right, but also wrong, because I think that Brooks would kind of be the Samaje Perine type of a role, or we see these backs across the league where Quint Allen's playing 30% of the snaps, but never is allowed to touch the ball. I think you'd get Brooks out there in 30 to 40% of the snaps, but they would be passing block snaps basically. And maybe he gets 2 or 3 targets. Maybe he gets a rush or 2. But I think when it comes to actually carrying the ball, they would put it in Wilson's hands. And so, and just like the irony of all ironies is that I think he returned to practice. I don't know that he's going to be active or would be active anyways, but Marshawn Lloyd was like popping
that
back
would be hilarious.
and it's like you and I have been on like the training camp beat and everything else and banging the drum here for Emmanuel Wilson. Is like, this would be just the most fitting thing if like this situation opens up where the starting job is open for the Packers, and then we just actually do see Marshawn Lloyd just come back and step right in there. But I don't think that would happen anyways. But I think one more on the injury front that we're looking for the Packers. Just Jaden Reed sounds like he's going to be returning imminently. And so I think that this is a team that this offense has really been struggling. And this doesn't feel like a great situation for the offense to get back and rolling. But Jaden Reed getting plugged back in there. I mean, the Packers still pushing towards the playoffs. So I think that's something to watch overall.
We talked about it yesterday with Alfredo Brown, but the Packers are just one of the weirdest teams out there because if you watch them, they don't look very good. If you look at the overall production of the offense, it's not very good. But then once you start looking at like the nerdy analytics, like they're the 4th best team in EPA per play. Like, all of the advanced analytics tell us they're a great team, but then you just watch them and you look at their record and you look at what they're doing out there, and it's like, I don't know if they're a great team. So like just a very confusing team to get a read on. And I think a big part of their issue is they just played out of their competition. Like the teams that they should just be putting away with a 20-point win, they just are always hanging in these games that they really have no business playing down to. Let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings though, Jeff. I'm very much so of the extend as much grace and patience to these young quarterbacks as possible, but it is impossible to ignore just how bad JJ McCarthy has been over these last couple of weeks. And we want to have long-term faith that he can develop. And, he was a guy that I was drafting pretty aggressively, trading for in dynasty leagues because I see the rushing upside. I see Kevin O'Connell's system. I see the pass catchers here in Minnesota. But at this point, I mean, you're still holding on to him in dynasty, hoping that he can put it together long-term. But I mean, he's nowhere near the conversation like in single quarterback redraft leagues. And even in your super flex leagues, I think like I'd rather pick up a Tyrod Taylor this week than go back to JJ McCarthy.
I mean, everybody, I don't know if it's quite chalk, but everybody was ready for a fantasy game from JJ McCarthy last week. And just how
I tweeted about it. I was the idiot that tweeted about JJ McCarthy being a good streamer last week. Like, that was a get right game. Like, the Bears give up the 2nd most rushing yards to quarterbacks than any other defense out there. And then JJ McCarthy like doesn't rush the ball at all last week. That's just, just when we think we got to figure it out.
Yeah, I was kicking myself because I was all over Sean Tucker last week, and I even played him in the Millie Maker with 1% ownership across the board. And unfortunately, on that lineup, I had a Viking stack with JJ McCarthy and Justin Jefferson and Aaron Jones kind of as my main stack there. And it's like, man, I nailed this thing that can really be a difference. And had that been a Cardinal stack, I might be a millionaire right now. But instead, I lost $20. So that's kind of what JJ McCarthy lands in. But the irony of all ironies would be the week that everybody was on him, he does nothing. And then the week that
Right.
everybody's ready to throw him out, he goes out and has a good game. But I think there's talk about Max Brosmer is like the perfect storm here for dynasty, fantasy, overthink, group think of he's a rookie and he's kind of unknown and you might not have realized he was the backup quarterback. And so he's definitely the undrafted Max Brosmer is definitely the answer to this Minnesota offense. McCarthy, 8 interceptions through his first 5 games. That is a list of not a very good list to be on. So I think if you were to scroll that list, I tweeted it out the other day. You've got Peyton Manning and Troy Aikman are on that list, but there's not been. Trevor Lawrence is about the most relevant name of recent vintage, and offenses are very, very different than when Peyton Manning and Troy Aikman were rookies.
And we talk about all the time, football is a game of inches. And, you might feel silly for starting JJ McCarthy or having your McCarthy Jefferson stack in the Millie Maker. But Jeff, I mean, we were so close. Like you saw the play, right? Like the Nashon Wright interception. It might have been the play of the week. Like it was just a superhuman effort. Like this dude jumped out of the stadium to come down with an interception, and had JJ McCarthy put an extra 2 inches on that ball, we're looking at a decent game from JJ McCarthy. Like there was a difference between a 45-yard touchdown and what ended up being an interception. So, and who knows how that changes the landscape of the rest of the game and how things play out after that. So, I mean, like we saw this Herculean interception from Nashon Wright when really JJ McCarthy missed a big touchdown to Justin Jefferson by a couple of inches. And that would totally change how we're talking about JJ McCarthy going into this week.
You're exactly right. And so much like those inflection points. And I think that overall, McCarthy's been a player that has been really outspoken and active about his mental health, his mental approach to the game. And so I think it's one that you would think somebody with that type of mindset would be able to push through these hard times, but it's just a difficult position to play. And it's sometimes, you're inches off. And then the next week you could be right on target. I mean, you're playing. Don't get cued and sit Justin Jefferson. Don't get cued and probably, Jordan Addison maybe might be a more of a fringe decision, but you're still probably playing Jordan Addison in most any matchup that you have him as well. And you're definitely, we let it off, the revenge game for Aaron Jones taking over this Vikings backfield.
Yeah, I'm sipping that revenge game juice this week. I've got Aaron Jones comfortably inside my top 15 running backs. Let's move on to the next one here. Indianapolis Colts at Kansas City Chiefs. Daniel Jones popped up on yesterday's injury report with a calf injury. He was limited in practice, but the team is downplaying it, saying that they're just, being precautious here and that he should be ready to go. For the Chiefs, we got Xavier Worthy not practicing on Wednesday, limited on Thursday, dealing with an ankle injury. And then Isaiah Pacheco, who was a full participant on Wednesday, downgraded to a limited participant on Thursday, where we don't really know yet whether that's just a part of his rehabilitation plan or if there is a setback here. We'll be paying close attention to what Pacheco is able to do during Friday's practice. But Jeff, I think the thing we need to talk about here with the Colts is Daniel Jones turning into a pumpkin. Over the last couple of weeks, it has been unbelievable. And they're winning games, so I don't think people realize it. I said this on a show last week, and somebody DM'd me, and they were like, I had to fact check this because it sounded unbelievable, but you are right. Over Daniel Jones's last 2 games, he has 12 sacks, 6 fumbles, and 4 interceptions. Like, this is not winning football, and they are still winning games because they've got an offensive line that can open up the run game for one of the best running backs in football, and their defense is good enough to keep them in it. But Daniel Jones, we are getting I don't know, we're on watch. We're waiting to see what Daniel Jones can do coming out of the bye.
I just can't imagine the Chiefs losing this game because they are just so, this is flipped from the idea. I had tweeted about it earlier in the season when they got off to a slower start of like the especially after the Jacksonville game of like this is a real chance that they missed the playoffs. And like you like now the Chiefs are not going to miss the playoffs. If they lose this game, there is, I think it might even be at the point where the Vegas odds might flip to them being favored to miss the playoffs if they were to lose this game. You talk about Daniel Jones. I think that's a very great point there. Going into the road here in Kansas City, like this, it's when you stack this game up, when you look at likely outcomes here, which is the most likely outcome, the Colts continue this hot start to their season and they put the end to the Patrick Mahomes season, or Daniel Jones comes fully unraveled to peak Daniel Jones season and 5-alarm fire about the Colts. Meanwhile, the Chiefs got to 6-5 and they're the you can't kill them yet.
The other thing I want to talk about the wide receivers here in Indianapolis, and it's so hard to like talk about things because people hear not what I'm saying, they hear what they want to hear. Alec Pierce is awesome. I love Alec Pierce, but the reality is, if you look over the last 5 weeks, Alec Pierce has only outscored Michael Pittman in one of those games. And I hear a lot of talk about how Alec Pierce is the new wide receiver one. I mean, what we saw before the bye was Michael Pittman very much so getting shut down. Oh my gosh, why am I drawing a blank? Was it the Falcons that they played, right? And it was it AJ Terrell? I can't remember. I should know this off the top of my head. Whoever it was, like,
has not been shut down in any game.
Michael Pittman.
Oh, no, Pittman. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I was looking up stats. I thought you were talking about Pierce getting shut down.
No. It was Pittman got shut down in like one game before the bye, and that's where we saw like that was the one game where Alec Pierce outscored Michael Pittman. And I think that both of these guys are like viable wide receiver twos, but I hear a lot of talk about like Alec Pierce taking the job from Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman's now pushed off the fantasy radar. Like I'm still ranking Pittman ahead of Alec Pierce. We can have multiple nice things. Like we don't have to pick or choose. You don't have to say one is better than the other. Like they're both just wide receiver twos that I think we can start pretty comfortably going forward.
Yeah, exactly. And it's everything doesn't have to be a thing. It doesn't have to be like so like black. Like I just I don't know. It's you got to have a take, and everything's got to be so black and white. And yeah, I mean it's in play for either of these players. We saw Pierce finally. I mean the major difference when you're stacking the two of them up is that Michael Pittman was scoring pretty much every single week, and Pierce hadn't scored. And then we get 1 week where Pierce does score and Pittman doesn't score, and so then it flips. But I mean the volume's been there for both of these players. The red zone involvement for Michael Pittman's been there. They're both going to be out there. You could see this game shooting out very, very easily given the pieces on both sides. Having Jonathan Taylor going up against Patrick Mahomes offense, this game could easily shoot out, and it could also be just an ugly Chiefs 1-score grinded out win.
And so I think we talked enough about the Colts. Let's talk about the Chiefs here briefly. Pacheco back at practice. We've been relying on Kareem Hunt as an RB2. Well, Pacheco has been out. My fear, Jeff, is that if Pacheco comes back, it's just all of these guys are just touchdown dependent RB3s. Like, Brashard Smith, we can keep wish casting the breakout, but it seems like his role hasn't really changed all that much. And then we're going to look at just a frustrating split of all of the non-passing down work between Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco, which means you're hoping one of them can score a touchdown. It's frustrating because like we want to be able to rely on a running back on this Chiefs offense, but I just don't know if it's really there.
So I do want to say, I don't know. It's so weird because Kareem Hunt has absolutely dominated touches with Pacheco out of the lineup, but he was still a touchdown dependent play. Like it's, you didn't get there on receiving volume or yardage to feeling good about Kareem Hunt. So in the one regard, sure, becomes a muddled situation. We've seen Pacheco take the lead in the backfield at moments this year, but coming off that injury, probably wouldn't do that. You'd still probably get Kareem Hunt ahead. It's like one of those that, sure, Pacheco's back in the lineup. I don't know that it changes the Kareem Hunt play at all because I think he's still the guy that they would go to in the goal line, and that's still the only thing that has mattered so far this season for a Kansas City running back. I think you make a great point there on Brashard Smith.
We're never seeing 25 touches go to running backs in this offense because they don't have to do that. They're just going to throw these swing passes out to Rashee Rice, and they're going to hit Travis Kelce on the short areas, and they're going to run jet sweeps to Xavier Worthy. Like, this isn't a normal offense. So, like, yeah, you can look at it and say, like, yeah, wow, Kareem Hunt, he's been getting 80% of the backfield touches, but that is such a small pie that it doesn't matter how big the slice is. It's just not that valuable.
Yeah, and we've Aaron 710 in the chat has been amazing all morning long. We really appreciate that. But throwing out there that if they're down there throwing to Smith, this is a stop trying to make fetch happen, because we saw Isaiah Pacheco out of the lineup, and that was a perfect opportunity to go to a split with Rashad Smith and Kareem Hunt, and all they did is double down on Kareem Hunt. I just think you're really pushing out there to think that Rashad Smith's going to be much of anything at this point this season, maybe even just overall, because you saw the opportunity to make him the split back, and it slid backwards. He got less involved in that situation. They just kept Kareem Hunt out there, and you look at it, if you could put the ball in Rashee Rice's hands or put the ball in Xavier Worthy's hands or Rashad Smith's, you're just not going to make that decision. Andy Reid's too smart to pick Rashad Smith over Rashee Rice running with the ball in those short yardage situations. Really, when we saw Smith start to come on a little bit, was Rashee Rice was out of the lineup, and they were looking for an answer on those short things. As soon as Rashee Rice plugs back in, it just disappears completely for Smith. It's just wish casting. And I think that even when you're looking long-term, putting your dynasty hat on it, we saw them try to trade for Breece Hall. I think I would be surprised with Isaiah Pacheco's contract coming up, with Kareem Hunt, given where he's at. I think they recognize that they could be in the market for a longer term solution. You've got Breece Hall going to be a free agent. Kenneth Walker could potentially be a free agent. You might have Travis Etienne as a free agent. I just think they're going to go out there on the market and grab one of these guys that will plug right in there, and you'll get the Saquon Barkley narrative basically for this Kansas City offense to unlock what the other missing piece is.
Last thing I want to talk about here, and I was going to bring it up, then we got a comment in the chat about Xavier Worthy. What are we doing with Xavier Worthy in Dynasty, Jeff? I have gotten multiple trade offers, people just trying to ship off their Xavier Worthy right now. I was a pretty big doubter this offseason. I had my concerns about him, but at this point, I feel like you probably shouldn't be selling at this low point, but you could also make the argument that this is just a guy who we've seen it at this point. He's been in the league for a year and a half, and we haven't really seen the boom games. You can kind of go either way with this one, but I think there is a good discussion to be had about Xavier Worthy's dynasty value at this point, and I'm interested to see where you stand.
We let off the show. We talked about Jameson Williams in this show. We talked about Chase Brown in this show. We talked about I believe that Xavier Worthy is a talented player, and I think that he's shown himself to be a talented player. And I think in the long term, even in the short term in redraft, but in the long term in dynasty, when the opportunity arises to bet on these players, just bet on them. Just grab them. Grab them at a discount. If it doesn't work out, you bought them at a discount, and sorry it didn't work out. I think that it's very real to have concern about Xavier Worthy, and a lot of that arises from Andy Reid being asked about Xavier Worthy, and we've seen some of these coaches, and the Lions, Dan Campbell is going to be out there, and he's going to say we got to get Jameson Williams more involved. Andy Reid felt like the other opposite direction of basically somebody was like, you need to get Xavier Worthy involved, and Andy Reid is kind of he's out there. It's we're not going to try to get him overly involved. But I think over time, unless you don't think that Xavier Worthy is talented, and that's fine. But I think that over time, if you can have these discounts and these players that playing with Patrick Mahomes, you just make that bet, because so often we see everybody was ready to punt on Ladd McConkey after 4 weeks, and then Ladd McConkey becomes wide receiver 5. We've got Fantasy Meatball has been awesome. Michael's out there and he's great. And he was asking a question about Nico Collins' volume. And like I said, Nico Collins has been, over the last 4 weeks, has been the second most targeted receiver in the NFL. It's just that in fantasy and dynasty, bet on these players that you think they're talented in good situations, and it's just not working for them right now. But if you don't think that Worthy is that type of player, that's another conversation.
It's so funny. You and I agree on everything, Jeff. We see the game in a very similar light. I feel like Xavier Worthy is just the one guy that we just see,
because I'm broken as a Bills fan, and the Bills traded him to the Kansas City. That is 110% my Xavier Worthy analysis of I am just shattered to my core as a Bills fan. The Bills traded Xavier Worthy away. I could imagine him just running verticals with Josh Allen all day long, and instead we have Keon Coleman can't even go to work. And so that's exactly I'm telling you, yes, my opinion here, I think my points on betting on talented players in good situations is very relevant and something that you should always do. Maybe Xavier Worthy isn't that talented player, and maybe it's just my broken soul that is saying that I've seen enough between Trent Duffy and Patrick Mahomes, and just with everything with Xavier Worthy, I'm just not lucky enough to have Xavier Worthy actually end up bad.
So here's my kind of Xavier Worthy take, and I'll rehash a lot what I said from the offseason because it's proven to be true this year as well. Is like he was thrust into a very volume heavy role because they didn't have anybody else. Rashi Rice was out for the season, and they had to try to just force volume on him, but he was just so inefficient with his touches. Like this was a guy who was getting 10, 11, 12 targets in these games and like couldn't even eclipse 100 receiving yards. So we saw him try him out in the deep role and he wasn't very efficient there. Then we saw him in this role where he was getting the short yardage stuff and he wasn't very efficient there. I mean, he has this is a crazy stat that I pulled the other day. He's been in the league for a year and a half now. He has been thrusted in a lot of volume. His career high receiving, 87 yards in a game. Like this is not a guy who has ever really had a boom game. He has one game it was the Super Bowl. That was the only, a non-regular season game was the only time he ever had over 100 yards. And that came on an FU throw from Patrick Mahomes when they were down 3 scores late in the fourth quarter. So, I mean, like, I just have concerns about like what you say, betting on talented players. That's my hangup. I don't know if Xavier Worthy is a talented player. He is fast. He is undoubtedly a fast player, but I just don't know about the other stuff. The contact balance, the ability to play through traffic, break tackles, all those sorts of things, even catching the ball. Like he is fast, but I'm sort of getting some like fancy John Ross vibes.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think he's shown more than Ross, but you talk about JJ McCarthy, game of inches. I think that when you look at Xavier Worthy, you flash back to that week 1, he runs that crosser and Travis Kelce gets knocked out of position, knocks Worthy out. I think had that not happened, I think that Worthy, we saw from that game plan with Hollywood Brown, maybe Worthy kicks the season off with 125 yards against the Chargers, and he's just rolling from that point versus having the injury, and maybe they pushed him back a little bit quickly because things were starting to go off the rails a little bit, and then he wasn't all the way quite ready potentially, and then all of a sudden you plug Rashee Rice back in there. It's one of the, I think you want to play the what if game. There's, had he not gotten injured week 1, maybe he just takes off. Maybe he just goes this direction, and maybe
Fair.
they're just there at that place.
All right. Well, we are very long-winded on today's show, Jeff. We got to pick up the pace, or we're going to be talking for 3 hours. Let's move on to the Seattle Seahawks at the Tennessee Titans. Torrey Horton's still not practicing with a shin injury. I mean, regardless whether he plays or not, I think we know what the Rashid Shaheed trade says about Torrey Horton's outlook for the rest of this season. JSN got a rest day, not even a full rest day, just a limited participation on Wednesday that they're chalking up as rest for the Titans. We've got Alec Aomanor not practicing with a hamstring, Shamir Dike dealing with a chest injury. Tajay Spears, love this, Jeff. Tajay Spears getting some preferential vet treatment. Getting, we talked about it all last year. Like Tony Pollard got a rest day every single Wednesday. They got Tony Pollard out there on Wednesdays now, and Tajay Spears is the one getting the rest days. We'll talk about that. Chikakonkwo limited with a foot injury. This is probably a game that we don't need to spend a ton of time on. We know who you're starting in these offenses. Like you're starting JSN, you're starting, I think, Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. We're giving the slight edge to Kenneth Walker now based on the shift in usage that we saw last week. But I think that Zach Charbonnet still makes for a touchdown type of flex play that you're hoping for here. Rashid Shaheed, if you're desperate, you could put him in the flex spot. I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about this Seattle offense, but it does seem pretty condensed. AJ Barner would be the other guy I'd throw in there as like a tight end streamer. We're seeing him getting these tush push looks as well. So any major things you'd want to talk about with Seattle?
Jackson Smith-Njigba broke Steve Largent's team record for most 100 receiving yard games in a season with 7. He needs a 157 yards only to break DK Metcalf's team record for 1,303 yards. He could get to that in this game. His 1,146 yards are the 8th most in NFL history through the first 10 games of the season. So there's some really fun numbers that Jackson Smith-Njigba is chasing. And real shout out to you, Dave, because preseason you were all over Jackson Smith-Njigba. And we talk a lot about behind the scenes. We talk a lot about our draft rankings and where we put guys in. And it's one of those that I wish I would have listened to you a little bit more on 2 guys, on Jackson Smith-Njigba and Jonathan Taylor. And I think that those are 2 of the, you can't get 2 bigger hits across the space than the 2 guys that you were ready to plant flags on, being Jackson Smith-Njigba and Jonathan Taylor.
If they can keep it up, it's going to be a very lucrative season for your boy. Let's just hope JSN and JT can stay healthy because they've been fun picks so far.
On
As for the yeah,
I do want on the Barner point.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we can split things up and do samples and all that, and yeah, is there really relevance or not? But in his 6 best games, he's averaged 12 half-point PPR points, which would make him tight end 4 in the season. Unfortunately, in his 4 worst games, he has a total of 5.2 points across those 4 games. So I think it's there. And we saw with 10 targets last week. There's definitely there for AJ Barner in a way that I don't know that all of fantasy has recognized. It's just going to be peaks and valleys, though.
And, I very early in the season was like, as we always do, wish casting for the rookie, like, Elijah Arroyo, it's going to happen. Da, da, da. But like AJ Barner is still a very young guy. And I think that he just didn't really have a role in the offense last year. Now with Clint Kubiak coming in, like we need these tight ends that can be well rounded, that can kind of do it all. And that's what we're seeing from AJ Barner. Still a young guy who is very much so ascending. And it's funny because we get so enamored by the rookies. Like I've seen no buzz for AJ Barner in dynasty trades. He's one of those guys that I think you can make a trade for inside a tier and then, oh, hey, while you're at it, why don't you throw AJ Barner in? Because I think that there is some actual upside here with AJ Barner. Of course, not the biggest fan of trading for a bunch of tight ends, but like if you're hurting it at the position and you're looking for some depth there, I think that AJ Barner is already a guy that you can kind of rely on as a weekly streamer.
Yeah, and I think the larger point is given the way that we look at things in Dynasty and everything else, everybody's ready for Elijah Arroyo is going to take over for him at some point in time. But I think AJ Barner is the type of tight end that locks in there. And really, I think if you Mike McDonald coming from the Ravens, just view AJ Barner as the Mark Andrews and view Elijah Arroyo as the Isaiah Likely. I think when it comes down to it,
Tennessee Titans. Is there anything to talk about? Like Tajay Spears, like you're starting him as a
if you play a Tennessee Titans against the Seattle Seahawks, mad after a loss last week, and our buddy Chris Harris would tease me about saying that the Seahawks are mad after a loss. But if you play Tennessee Titan in fantasy this week, you deserve what's coming to you. So
you don't think? I mean, Tajay Spears. Come on, like if Tajay
sure,
Spears,
I think you can make the argument that you can't run on the Seahawks. So if you look at it from a PPR standpoint, that Spears could be that guy that gets to 6 catches because of just struggles. That's what you're betting on if you were to play Tajay Spears in fantasy. Other than
I'll
that,
put it this way.
like,
Tajay Spears, he's RB
play
33
Titans.
for me. Yeah, he's RB 33 for me, and he's the Titan player that I feel best about. But like, I if Jalen Warren is playing, I'd prefer Kenneth Gainwell over Tajay Spears. So that should tell you how we feel about this Titans offense as a whole. Hoping, there could be some coaching changes and some investments at the wide receiver and offensive line position. And hopefully we can see a better sophomore campaign from Cam Ward. But yikes, this season has been rough. On to the next game, Jeff. We are officially in the afternoon window. Jacksonville Jaguars at Arizona Cardinals. Lots of injuries here and lots of impactful injuries. Travis Etienne dealing with a shoulder injury. He's been limited. Bayshaw Tootin dealing with an ankle injury. He has been limited. Brian Thomas Jr. also dealing with an ankle injury. He is limited. Hunter Long is back at practice, playing in a limited fashion. Marvin Harrison Jr. out for this game. Amari DeMercado out for this game. Trey Benson back at practice, coming back from that knee injury. And then Bam Knight also limited with an ankle injury right now. So like almost every player I talked about is somebody who is on the fantasy radar. We're dealing with a slew of injuries here. Let's start with the Jacksonville backfield, Jeff. Sounds like Bayshaw Tootin is trending towards potentially playing this week. I feel like if we start getting into the hypotheticals, we could just talk about this game for 2 hours. So let's just assume that both are going to play, Bayshaw Tootin and Travis Etienne. I'm going to ask might be a rhetorical question to you, but I think it's worth discussing for the audience to hear. Bayshaw Tootin or Travis Etienne, who would you prefer between the two?
Either. I don't know. Cop out, but I mean, I think that you probably arguably could get away with either of them in your lineup for sure. But if you were to make this decision between the two, I probably still would lean ETN, just the veteran presence there. But I think it's, first off, I think if one of them were going to be playing, I think that Tootin, I like his odds of playing a little bit better than ETN, because Tootin hasn't been in the red jersey as much as ETN has been. And I think that the narrative coming out of it, Tootin was out there saying that he was fine after the game, and I think that the blowout nature of that game led into Tootin being just put on ice, and kind of they saw the breakout, they saw what they wanted to see. We would lose our fantasy license if we did not say the Bichal Tootin breakout season is here and happenings. But he looked really good against the Chargers, and that's the Chargers defense that struggled badly against the run. Tootin just bringing the violence. It's just a fun player to watch.
Absolutely. And to me, this like kind of feels like we've got just another like Travis Etienne is Kenneth Walker, Bashal Tootin is Zach Charbonnet with a little bit more juice. But like this is one where if we're looking at a 50-50 split on a high scoring offense with two talented running backs, start them both. Like I've got them both inside my top 24 this week, and I think it's kind of as simple as that. And of course, I asked the question because you need to have a take, Jeff Bell. Is it Tootin season or is it ETN season? Like you got to pick one, and I think the answer is just both of them. Let's talk about the wide receivers here, though. We saw Jacoby Myers come on last week with a much expanded role. Looked like the true wide receiver one in this offense. It's very weird, Jeff, when I'm looking at consensus rankings. A lot of people don't have Brian Thomas Jr. ranked, or a lot of people have him ranked in the 50s, 60s, 70s this week. I see that he practiced all of last week and was questionable up until Sunday morning. He's practicing again this week. I feel like I'm one of the only people saying that I think Brian Thomas Jr. might play this week. And if he does play, like I'm starting him as kind of a high-end wide receiver 3. Am I crazy for thinking that?
No, I don't think you're crazy for thinking that at all. And we talked earlier in the year about maybe Brian Thomas Jr. is the type of player that needs that other receiver to take some of the pressure off of him and allow him to kind of operate in a secondary role. In the way that we're seeing Jacoby Myers come on, arriving on the team as kind of stepping into the Parker Washington during his breakout had played more in the slot than he had played outside. Right. Whereas early in the season, Parker Washington was playing a lot more outside than he was playing in the slot. Last week was the first time in the last couple of weeks we saw it flip back, where Washington did play more outside than in the slot. I think you see project long-term there of Jacoby Myers moving into being that slot receiver that handles a lot of the short to intermediate volume. And then Brian Thomas Jr. can get back to making explosive plays playing off of that. Diami Brown has really started to fall out of the rotation, season low 27% of snaps last week. You've got Tim Patrick kind of is that nominal guy that I think has been the placeholder for Brian Thomas Jr. And when you look at, body types are similar, athleticism is not similar, but you can project that Tim Patrick kind of holds down what Brian Thomas Jr. brings to it. Brian Thomas Jr., he practiced in full last week. I think fully expect him to be ready to go. And he does one of these guys that bet on talented players. And I think we saw that breakout the second half of last year. I think the pullback has been too extreme on Brian Thomas Jr.
Yeah, and I think like it's so obvious what this Liam Cohen offense wants, and we saw it last year. Like they are just going to run these very simple high-low levels concepts where they want one guy who can be the short to intermediate guy playing out of the slot, and then you want the one guy who can line up out wide and beat man coverage and get these deep plays. And we saw it last year where Chris Godwin was the guy playing out of the slot. When he got hurt, we saw Cade Otton doing it a little bit. We saw Jalen McMillan doing it a little bit, and then the guy out wide was Mike Evans. And like it to me seems like Brian Thomas Jr. should be the Mike Evans guy in this offense, but we saw them try to put Brian Thomas Jr. in the slot, and that didn't work. And then they pushed him out wide. And then we saw this rotation where it was a little bit of Diami Brown and a little bit of Parker Washington. I think we finally saw it starting to come together the way that you and I had envisioned in the preseason, where we said Travis Hunter should be the Chris Godwin and Brian Thomas Jr. should be the Mike Evans. But then, of course, Travis Hunter got hurt. That's why they went out and they traded for Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers playing over 50% of his routes out of the slot last week. And I think this is just what we're going to see now. Jacoby Myers can play out of the slot. He can catch the ball through traffic. He can work on those short and intermediate routes. And I think that's exactly what Brian Thomas Jr. needs to break out. So he might be a little bit limited in this matchup, but like I'm still starting Brian Thomas if he's active.
Yeah, I think the situations where you're not, you'd have to have something that you feel really good about.
Let's talk about the Cardinals because this is a Cardinals offense that there's much to talk about, as we have seen Jacoby Brissett just I don't know, like is this the Ryan Fitzpatrick, Jeff? Is that kind of what we're looking at with Jacoby Brissett here? Just like stepping in and just giving us like superhuman play for a few weeks before he inevitably turns into a pumpkin?
This is an episode about the Wayback Machine, and I remember Boomer Esiason was a Cardinal for a little brief stint and just kind of came out of nowhere and had like an insane run of numbers in the 90s as a Cardinals quarterback, and then just fell back to irrelevancy. But I think it's more I mean, to unpack the Kyler Murray conversation, we had it in base camp a little bit this week, and the Kyler Murray wasn't running the offense in the way that the coaches wanted the offense run. He just hasn't progressed since a young player, and a young player that the number one overall pick in the draft that is hyper locking on to DeAndre Hopkins the way that he was hyper locking on to Trey McBride and can run a little bit. You'll put up with that when he's the first overall pick in the draft. When he's a 28-year-old that you're paying nearly $50 million a year, okay, you need to see probably something else overall. And I just think Brissett is operating within the structure, the way that they want him to operate, pushing the ball downfield and really kind of setting it in place so that when they get their quarterback of the future, they're able to plug him in there and be ready to go.
Michael Wilson. We've got no Marvin Harrison Jr. in this game. We saw Michael Wilson last week, 15 for 18, 185 yards. And Jeff, man, got to tip my hat to you. You have been a Michael Wilson guy since before he ever even took an NFL snap. I said it on the launch pad yesterday. Jeff Bell, never, ever wrong. Just sometimes a little bit early. And I think that's all it was. You're just a little early on Michael Wilson, but like on a team that has like a franchise that has had Anquan Bolden and Larry Fitzgerald and DeAndre Hopkins and these superstar receivers. Now we see Michael Wilson atop all of these single game records. I mean, what we saw last week was unbelievable. I don't think we're going to see Jacoby Myers throwing 48 completed pass attempts or, almost 60 attempts again in a game. But like Michael Wilson, the breakout is here. And like he was getting awesome usage too. It wasn't just like, like we were seeing the in-breaking routes, we were seeing the downfield routes, we were seeing contested catches. Like he, to me, this didn't look like a fluke. He looked like a bona fide wide receiver one. Like this was a better game from Michael Wilson than we've ever seen from Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, I can't take that full victory lap because I know if you were to flash back to last week, you'd brought Michael Wilson up, and I expressed some hesitation last week about Michael Wilson. But at the same time, one of the reasons why I absolutely love that we do this show together is because we look at things like this. And coming out of that last week, I took that second look, and I did end up above consensus in my ranks last week for Michael Wilson Jr. And you kind of plant these seeds and we start to think through these things. But I think he's definitely a player that can do a lot more than what he's been asked to do so far in his career. And the other, I can't take the full victory lap on the scouting process, but when I was working through the wide receivers, and we are gearing up to do that rookie guide will be coming to you. And I've handled the bulk of the wide receivers, all the wide receivers in the past. Last year we shifted around a little bit, but I'm going to get back into and I am the number one ECR ranker in wide receivers over the last 3-year composite. So I do occasionally get some things right, but when I watched Michael Wilson as the rookie process, he was off the Devy radar, off the college radar, because he was hurt a lot of the years. But so often as it happens, as I see these prospects and these deep guys that raise interest, you go to a social media search and you see what else is out there, who else said anything. And only one other name was out there on saying that he liked Michael Wilson, and it is the venerable Matt Waldman. And that's a good jumping out. We just had a great show last night with Matt, myself, and Joey Wright joining us. And Joey kind of pinged me shortly before the show and said, "Hey, I'm available. What's going on?" And it was just a great talk outside of just fantasy, just talk about life, and just say how you'll get these shows and we talk about players all the time and these things. It's one of those shows that just kind of, if you're struggling or if you're having tough moments or things like that, a show that's worth going back and listening to. But thank you so much, Matt and Joey. And we definitely have to shout out the home league show that Joey has launched with our Kevin Murray. And it's really great, especially if you're a commissioner in your league. You have to check that show out. But the two of those, and Joey just doing fantastic work here at Football Guys to pull everything together. We're getting ready for our Vegas retreat that Joey pulls together. Just so thankful to be around this team of you and Matt and Joey, and to be able to interact with you all, and appreciate it greatly. So as a way to saying Michael Wilson, he can play in this week.
Last question I have about this game, Jeff. It seems like Trey Benson is trending towards being active. We're hearing some pretty good coach speak from Jonathan Gannon. 21-day practice window open this week. My advice, I'll just give you my advice, and then you can tell me whether you agree or disagree. If Trey Benson is active, don't start any Cardinals running backs this week, because we don't know what's going to happen. Like, is there going to be a ramp-up phase for Trey Benson? Our touch is going to get split 3 ways? Are we going to see Bam Knight in a secondary role behind Trey Benson? Like, I don't know what's going to happen here. So I think, like, if Trey Benson is back, unfortunately for you who were relying on Bam Knight and Michael Carter, I don't think you can do that. I also don't think you could trust Trey Benson because there could be an acclimation period here. I think this is just like a, hey, sit back, keep everyone out of your lineup, waiting to see how this plays out. And then hopefully we have the information needed to rank these guys appropriately going into week 13.
I hear you. At the same time, there's been a lot of conversation about the Cardinals backfield being confused. I don't think the Cardinals backfield's confusing in the slightest. I think it's, if you want to really look,
it's a 50-50 split.
Yeah, it's a work share split based upon
Yeah.
there's an early down back, and it's Bam Knight when he's out of the lineup. It'll be Trey Benson when he returns to the lineup, and then there's a passing down, and it's Amari DiMercato, or he was out of the lineup, and it's Michael Wilson. It's
right.
And I think
Like
the
Carter.
easiest way to conceptualize it is you look back at Drew Petzing when he was in Cleveland when they had Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. That's just what this Cardinals backfield is. It's just a different version, less talented version, and you're the early down guy, you're hoping for a touchdown. That receiving back, whether or not the volume's really there for that receiving back, those are the things that you're dealing with. But I think in terms of, it's not a particularly confusing backfield at all. It's just that I don't know that there's necessarily ceiling for any option.
Right. Yeah, and I don't think it's confusing. It's just not good. I think that's what it is. Like they're two not talented players splitting work, which doesn't typically lead to a lot of fantasy production unless they can fall into the end zone. All right, Jeff, biggest game of the week. I know you've been dying to talk about this one. Cleveland Browns at Las Vegas Raiders. Get your defenses and special teams ready in this one. Let's talk about some of the injuries here. Dillon Gabriel, he is not going to play this week with a concussion, which means Shedeur Sanders is getting a start. David Njoku dealing with a knee injury, has not practiced yet this week. All of the fantasy relevant Raiders players are healthy, which is good for them. How much time do we need to spend on this one realistically? Like if you're starting a lot of fantasy players in this matchup, you're probably trending towards a consolation. I mean, Harold Fannin, like I don't even feel good about Harold Fannin this week. Like we saw Harold Fannin really blow up when Dillon Gabriel took over as the starter. I have concerns about Dillon Gabriel not starting and what that means for Harold Fannin. Like he's in the streaming discussion. I've got him as like my tight end 16 on the week. Quinshon Judkins, you're starting him. Ashton Jinty, you're starting him. Brock Bowers, you're starting him. But I don't think there's a lot of hitting gold in this matchup.
No, you wouldn't think so. If David Njoku misses, I mean, Harold Fannin's been buzz around there, but we've seen Cedric Tillman return and plug right back into the wide receiver 2 role. And since he returned, that shifted some of the volume for Harold Fannin. I mean, you don't bet on Shedeur Sanders getting a lot rolling. The Raiders defense has got shredded last week against the Cowboys, but they played well against the Broncos. We don't do in the defensive side. I don't know if Max Crosby is going to be available or not, but if he's available, I feel like almost the thing to watch in this would be Max Crosby against Myles Garrett, who's going to get the most sacks between the two of them is kind of really the thing to watch here. I mean,
I feel like these are two of the same teams, like just terrible offenses, terrible offensive lines. Like they each have one bright spot and it's on the defensive line. And that just tells me that this is going to be a gross game.
Yeah, you've got 2 rookie running backs here, but Judkins, the efficiency has just been horrible over the last month, and you're not seeing any passing to get Judkins to that. That Miami game was the only game he had a touchdown in since early in the season. And then I think on the Raiders side, obviously Brock Bowers is there. And I think one of the bigger shifts that we saw last week was the move to make Michael Mayer more of a full-time player, having 2 tight ends, Brock Bowers playing 97% of the snaps, having Mayer closer to 80% of the snaps, and locking into that 2 tight end set as the base package that they're working with. We saw Tucker get the touchdown, but we talked about it earlier in the show that we saw a Dallas defense that the Raiders offense wasn't able to get rolling against. Outside of Brock Bowers, I mean, if you've got him and you probably don't have better options than Ashton Jinty and Quinshon Judkins, other than that, you're really getting desperate to play a player in this game.
And I think we're going to see a lot of tight ends in this game just because of the strength of the edge rushers in both of these. We're going to see a lot of 12 and 13 personnel to bring in those extra blockers and try to do whatever they can to mitigate this pass rush here. But overall, probably could be a gross game. But also, like, sometimes we see these gross games end up like in a 35-38 shootout. So, crazier things have happened. But yeah, I think you know who we care about in fantasy for this one. Don't need to spend too much time here. Let's go on to the Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys, the actual probable best game of the week. And all the Eagles players that we care about for a fantasy perspective are healthy. Dak Prescott practicing in full through a hip injury, but this is one that, like, luckily in what is a pretty star-studded matchup, everybody's going to be playing here. We don't have to worry about a lot of backups and whatnot. Jeff, this kind of shocked me the other day. I looked at it. And you're a smart guy. You probably know the answer to this. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, they played the last 4 games together. Who do you think has more points in those 2 games? Or I'm sorry, in those
I
4 games.
Given that the way that you're asking this question, and given that we coming out of Monday night, we saw the Cowboys have made the worst, or the Steelers made the worst trade in NFL history to flip George Pickens for DK Metcalf. I'm going to bet that George Pickens is going to be the answer to your question there.
It was kind of a double trick question. It actually is CeeDee Lamb, but
Good for
only
you,
by
Dave. I appreciate that. Like, great job. Great job, Dave.
But here's the kicker. By 0.1 points per game. They're averaging 14.4 and 14.3 points per game. They are the per game wide receiver 10 and wide receiver 11 since returning. So this is one of those, like, I think we have to change how we look at CeeDee Lamb a little bit. And, like, I was pounding the table aggressively for CeeDee Lamb this year, and probably one of my worst early round calls. I was drafting him as a top 5 player. I was drafting him pretty aggressively. We've just seen this guy like year after year as a top 3 receiver, but the reality is with George Pickens there, he is more of a low end wide receiver 1. George Pickens is also producing like a low end wide receiver 1. And the way that they get there couldn't be more different. Like CeeDee Lamb is the target hog who is going to pull the volume. George Pickens doesn't have the volume, but he makes up for the volume with the explosive after the catch abilities and the contested catches and the touchdowns and all that. But when you look at it, regardless of how they get there, they arrive to the same spot as being low end RB or low end wide receiver 1s.
Yeah, I mean, this is a game. You're firing your pieces, but at the same time, the over under is not quite as high as I kind of expected it to be. And
Yeah.
I mean, 47.5 is not a low over under, but at the same time, it's not, like a
Like it should have been a
50.5
51.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So those people that make those numbers are usually pretty correct. And I think really the conversation comes down to it. You're playing all your fantasy relevant pieces. On Dallas's side, Dak Prescott 159 passing yards away from becoming the franchise's leader in passing yards. So that's in play in this Eagles matchup. But the Eagles defense has been excellent, has been very, very good. We saw Howie Roseman get aggressive at the trade deadline, go out, add some pieces to shore that up. And we saw them shut down the Lions last week. Dallas's side, another team that went out and got some pieces at the trade deadline on the defensive side. And while the only game that we have coming out of that is a Raiders offense that everybody could potentially shut down, I think the thing to watch overall in this game, Lane Johnson's injury might play into it. But if Dallas has actually made some improvements on that defense, if Philly's offense continues to struggle to get rolling, if the Philadelphia defense is that very, very good, legitimate, and maybe we get stalled out here on the fantasy options that we want to go with. But I think you're playing both Dallas receivers. You're feeling great, regardless of what you paid for George Pickens this offseason. It's CeeDee Lamb. It's still there. Its ceiling is still definitely there. I mean, the two of them kind of had a fun time prior to the game, and they had a fun time during the game. And
I gotta say that's like the quote of the season is like CeeDee Lamb getting mad at a reporter is like, no, I wasn't puking at 7 a.m. I know how to hold my liquor.
Yeah. Well, and it's just so like I think George Pickens just really like unpacking the DK Metcalf George Pickens conversation. I mean, I led my Target Report article this week where I dive into all the target trees in this NFL, talking about just the decision that the Steelers had to make there, and having George Pickens around for 3 years and knowing the person that they would be investing in to give a large contract to, and making that decision that they felt better about going with DK Metcalf as in investing in him. But George Pickens, I think, is that element of chaos that just feels so Cowboys, that feels like just like this is
Owens.
Yes, exactly. This is one of those that once you hear the Vegas story and then you see the game that Pickens puts together, there's a really good documentary that just came out this offseason about the Cowboys teams of the 90s. I just felt like Jerry Jones has got to be smiling at these his 2-star receivers shutting down a casino and then going out and lighting up the Raiders. Feels like the most prime Cowboys thing imaginable. And so I think that's just it's just a fun element to have.
I told Colton while we were recording yesterday that I was doing some writing, so I had my laptop in front of me while I was watching the game, and you probably know the play I'm talking about, but there was this crossing route to George Pickens, and he goes straight to the sideline, and there's just 3 defenders there, and it looks like George Pickens is like clearly going down for what's like an 8-yard gain, so I see him hit this like just mass of defenders, and I look down and I keep typing in my computer, and then I hear Joe Buck just like, and he turns it upfield, he's going down the sideline, and I look up and I'm like, how did he possibly get out of that? Like, he's just doing some some really fun things out there. Overall, like this is a star-studded matchup. There's a ton of fantasy goodness in this one, but both of these offenses are clean and consolidated. We know who the touches are going to. I guess the one thing I have to ask here, Jeff, there's been so much made about AJ Brown, and you and I briefly talked about this yesterday. I think this is going to be one of those things like everybody is like, what's going on with AJ Brown? What's going on with the offense, the offensive play calling, the offensive coordinator, Kevin Patullo? Everyone's pointing fingers at everybody. I think what's going to happen is the Eagles season is going to end, whether that be, some point in the playoffs or after the Super Bowl. And then we're going to get news about a week later that AJ Brown is going in for knee surgery, that he's got something going on. Like, to me, you just don't see this, that AJ Brown has been one of the best receivers in football since coming into the league for over half a decade. These guys don't just fall off the age cliff at 28. This isn't a one-year wonder. This isn't a Kenny Galladay. Like, this is a good prospect who has been productive and dominant for years. This has to be injury related. Like, I refuse to believe that AJ Brown just fell off the cliff.
Yeah, it's the numbers I shared with you, and the numbers I put in my target report. The narrative is that AJ Brown's not getting the ball, but he's had 2 games. He had a week one. Everybody was watching that.
Everybody watched, right?
One target in that game, and then he had another Monday night game or Sunday night game against the Packers where he had 3 targets. If you take out those games, he's at 8.7 targets per game, which would be the second most of his career in any season. He's at about 63 yards per game across those games, which would be the lowest total of his season. It's a player that the even when he was an elite fantasy receiver, he never had the elite volume. He was just elite efficiency. And that's the biggest things, that you're looking for efficiency and you're looking for volume. And when you combine those two things, you have Jamar Chase. When you have one of those two things, you can still have a wide receiver 1, which is what we get with AJ Brown with the elite efficiency. But when you lose that efficiency and you're also not getting elite volume, it's really hard to put the numbers together, because ultimately fantasy football at the end of the day is an accumulation game. And if the 2 levers that make for accumulation aren't hitting, you're not getting it. I think that you're probably, AJ Brown is just too young to be like washed and just done. And at 28 years old, there should be still some great football left. I think the only caveat to that is we do see with these big receivers sometimes that that
Allen Robinson
hits, and it hits fast. But I think Brown it would just surprise me if that were the case. I think you're probably right there, or it might be a usage thing, or maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of whispers around the Philadelphia being fed up with Jalen Hurts at some levels, and so maybe that's going on. But I don't know what's going on with the Eagles. We talk about the '90s Cowboys and all those types of things. It feels like last year was a very laser focused Philadelphia team with a mission, and then this year is the team that won the title last year. And maybe the focus isn't necessarily all. The disease of more is something that I think it was Pat Riley, I think, used to talk about the disease of more, of like, once you've kind of have accomplished something, then you move off those team goals a little bit and you start to worry about some other things. But one more point I do want to make about the Eagles offense: Saquon Barkley, so much talk about his disappointing season. He's gone over 90 scrimmage yards in 3 consecutive games. He was only over 90 scrimmage yards once over the first 7 games of the season. So you're starting to see it put together. It should be there against the Dallas defense, but maybe the Dallas defense is a better defense now with Quinnen Williams and with some corners getting healthy.
I got some Saquon Barkley numbers here for you, Jeff. Saquon Barkley's played 10 games this year, so we could split his season right down the middle into 2 samples, 5 games and 5 games. And the second half of those 5 games started with the New York Giants game, where we saw him just kind of, as you like to say, Jeff, seeing the ball go in the hoop. And it just seemed like that was the game where he kind of broke out, and he has looked like the Saquon Barkley of old since. First 5 games of the season, looking at rushes of 15-plus yards, Saquon Barkley did it twice. Last 5 games, he's averaging 1 yard per game of 15-plus yards. He's done it 5 times over the last 5 games. But the really big kicker is missed tackles forced. We talked about that early in the season, he just, these tackles that we would see him break with ease, he wasn't breaking. He was getting tripped up by safeties. He was getting taken down by cornerbacks. And we were just saying, like, it's there. Like, it's at the precipice. He just needs to break these tackles. First 6 games of the season, Saquon Barkley had 6 missed tackles forced. Over the last 5 games, he has 21 missed tackles forced. So increasing his broken tackle rate over 3-fold, increasing his breakaway run rate almost 3-fold. I mean, to me, over the last 5 weeks. Saquon Barkley looks like Saquon Barkley, but I think a lot of people hold on to these early season priors, and there's all this talk about Saquon Barkley washed and the Eagles are broken and the offensive line is in shambles, when the reality is like Saquon Barkley has been Saquon Barkley over the last 5 weeks. Anything else on this game, Jeff?
Just coming out of this, because so much it's been just the talk of, target this Dallas defense and go after this Dallas defense, and maybe there will be a strong defensive performance from Dallas will be just the entire focus will be, oh, Philly's offense is really, really broken. But I think that if there is a strong Cowboys defensive performance, that's something that we probably need to start paying a little bit of attention to, that maybe they did solve some of the issues that they had.
Atlanta Falcons at New Orleans Saints. Michael Penix out for the season with a torn ACL, so we're going to be looking at Kirk Cousins going forward. Drake London not practicing with a knee issue. We expect him to miss at least this week and potentially more. Brandon Cooks was released by the Saints. Alvin Kamara is practicing in a limited fashion, dealing with an ankle injury, and then Chris Olave is also dealing with an ankle injury. He is practicing in full. Jeff, this is just a nightmare scenario for the Falcons. Like this is bad. And you and I were both very heavy Drake London drafters. I don't know if Drake London's going to return in a couple of weeks or if he's done for the season. Even when he does return, I don't have a lot of faith in him playing with Drake London. This just this sucks. I don't know what else to say.
It's a suck bowl. It's really between these two teams. I mean, this is Kirk Cousins' last. Kirk Cousins is probably not going to be an Atlanta Falcon after this year. They're probably going to release him. So this stretch coming up here is Kirk Cousins' chance to show that some team should try to see if he's still a starting NFL quarterback after this year. So that's in play. When you look at Drake London out of this lineup, I mean, that's a massive blow here. I would expect. So the way that the Falcons are a team I cover in the summer, and the way that the Falcons receivers break down is Casey Washington is the direct replacement for Darnell Mooney, and Daryl Hodge comes in for Drake London because of the archetypes of the receivers that you have there. David Sills is really locked in as the wide receiver 3 with Atlanta. There's been a connection throughout the preseason of David Sills and Kirk Cousins. Maybe that's something that's in play. Maybe the volume that we saw early 2024, Darnell Mooney was really good with Kirk Cousins. Maybe that's in play here. The Saints run defense has been pretty strong, really good this year. And so I think that's they've been top 5 defense in EPA against the run. So that might put Bijan Robinson into a really difficult situation. You're still firing up Robinson, but that might give you some major pause on if you're, buying the goal line opportunities for Tyler Algier. That's, I think, something to consider here in this matchup. It's just, I think definitely Bijan Robinson outside of probably Mooney in some situations. You don't feel good about anybody on the Falcon side from what we've seen from Kirk Cousins.
I talked again. I was on Harris Football yesterday. Chris Harris and I, we talked about like our flex plays that we have the most questions about, and Darnell Mooney was one that I brought up because when you're looking at the numbers and projected target share and these sorts of things, Darnell Mooney feels like he should be a smash play this week. But then you just zoom out and you're like, well, Kirk Cousins has looked terrible. And Darnell Mooney has looked awful this year as he is struggling through injury. And I mean, it's not just like you can look at the metrics too. It's not just the eye test. Darnell Mooney right now in yards per route run ranks in 97th among wide receivers. Like the efficiency has been terrible. He's not drawing targets. Kirk Cousins isn't good. So it feels like Darnell Mooney should be a solid streaming wide receiver this week. But like, he could also end up finishing the week as the wide receiver 60, and David Sills gets all of the targets. And we're saying, what were we thinking starting Darnell Mooney? So like, I have some pause there, and I'm okay just being like way below consensus on Darnell Mooney this week, because even if I am wrong, I don't think the upside is that high.
Yeah, I think really the way that they stormed out against the Carolina last week, it felt like that was their last chance to really. They thought this was going to be a promising season, and then the way that they fell apart. And this is a defense that going into that Carolina game had been the lowest yards per game across the league. And then now you have Bryce Young, who had not topped 200 not even 300, 200 passing yards since week 3 in that comeback against the Cardinals, goes out there and throws for 448 yards. it just, I mean, Bill Simmons brought back his mailbag. I was listening to it yesterday podcast, and he has a metric: wins over Raheem Morris. That would basically when a team improves their coaching situation, that they just get better and wins. And he calls it wins over Raheem Morris. There's a reason why he calls it wins over Raheem Morris. And yeah, I mean, there's been some talk in the chat already about future here. I don't see how this coaching staff stays in place with Atlanta. I think you probably will get a cleaning the house there. Michael Penix, a weird thing, but maybe not weird thing, but I think it's like 5 of his last 8 seasons have ended with a season-ending injury. And so I think when you look at how good the rookie class of quarterbacks were last year, you knew it's almost like you can plot it out here. If like you knew one of these guys was bad, and it's like, okay, well now we feel like JJ McCarthy was the guy that was bad. You knew that one of these guys would have some promise, but injuries would get in the way. Now we feel like maybe Michael Penix is that guy that's some promise, injuries in the way, and then you can get some other great players out of what is really a great quarterback class that came in last year.
It will be funny to just think about how we might view this quarterback class 5 years from now after like last year. Like, this is the best quarterback class in NFL history. And it'll be interesting to see how we're feeling about it come 2030. Last thing I want to say about this one, Jeff, one quick note on this game. I am way above consensus on Alvin Kamara this week. Tell me if I'm crazy. I think, we look at all the usage leading up to the trade deadline, and I wonder how much the lack of usage was, hey, let's try to keep Alvin Kamara fresh and healthy unless somebody comes calling. And then coming out of the trade deadline, Alvin Kamara has 25 touches and is the clear workhorse back in this on this offense again. I know he's getting up there. The efficiency hasn't been the same, but I'm not scared off by Devin Neal. I think that Alvin Kamara is just going to get an RB1 workload for the rest of the season. Maybe this is just me bag protecting because of how much Alvin Kamara I have in fantasy this year. But 25 touches last week, or the last game that they played, to me, that tells me that they don't have a lot of faith in Devin Neal, and we're just going to see Alvin Kamara do what Alvin Kamara has done.
Yeah, the Falcons have been a big run funnel defense, and so it should be there for Kamara. We just poo-pooed all over all the offensive options on the Falcons side, but then it is also one of those games that everybody's glued into the Eagles-Cowboys game, and that's what I talk about. And you get these, if it's a Thursday night game here in these teams, it could be just like a complete awful. Everybody's mad about this one, but meanwhile, if it's one of these afternoon windows where everybody's focus is on the game of the week, then you just get an absolute nutty shootout in the NFC South. Feel like more happens often as well. And so I think that you have to recognize the potential for that situation to be in play, even with concerns about Kirk Cousins, with concerns about Tyler Shuck, that sometimes you see these games just go wild and shoot out. And I think that Kamara, you feel like this could be maybe the last good spot that you're feeling good about putting Kamara in here. But I think, you've got to recognize that's in play. Juwan Johnson, I think, is in play for tight ends. You're looking for, he's probably not a streamer territory anymore, but you need a tight end in here. We've seen him be the nominal wide receiver 2 since they traded Rashid Shaheed. Chris Olave, it could be there for a big game. It's ugly. It's gross. You don't feel good about any of the options in this game, but the potential for a shootout, very, very real.
2 games left to talk about here, Jeff. We're on to Sunday Night Football, and I'm sorry. First of all, thank you to anybody who's still sticking through. Like, we're hitting the 2-hour mark, and we still got a couple games left. You guys are the best. You guys allow us to do this show. Thank you for listening. And Jeff, I'll try to get you out of here as quickly as possible. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at Los Angeles Rams. We've got Emeka Egbuka limited with an illness. Chris Godwin practicing in full on Thursday, so we expect to see him out there. Bucky Irving, there's some weird stuff going on that we will break down. Limited in practice, but we're getting some weird reports from Mike Florio and then Rick Stroud kind of pushing back on that. Whatever, we'll talk about that. Sterling Shepard, full participant on Thursday, so we'll expect to see him out there. Baker Mayfield, limited on Wednesday with an illness, but good to go Thursday. And then Tyler Higbee placed on IR is the only notable injury for the Rams. Jeff, I think we need to start talking about Bucky Irving here. I'm sure you saw the reports yesterday where Mike Florio was really kind of beating around the bush, saying talking to Chris Sims. He's like, I'll tell you what's going on off air. I can't really say it right now, but there's bigger things than the shoulder and all this. And Rick Stroud, who is a very respectable Bucs beat reporter, he just kind of flat out said, he's like, these are mental health issues. Like, Bucky Irving is struggling not being with his team. This is the first extended absence he's ever had from football, and he's struggling. I don't think that that's crazy whatsoever. Like, this guy has lived and breathed football his entire life. He is a young man who has dedicated his life to football, and he is struggling to return from an injury. I think it's very normal for there to be some, mental health problems along with that recovery. But I think that we're making a mountain out of molehill here. I think that once he's healthy, he's going to be back and he's going to be the RB1 on this team. And I think that people are kind of overreacting to this Florio report from yesterday.
We talked about Michael Mayer playing and solidifying himself there in the Raiders. And Mayer was a player last year that when you look at the situation for him, he was almost a first round pick in the 2023 draft, went 35th overall, and everything was set up for him to be that guy, that main tight end for the Raiders. And then they go around and it really just happened to be, they didn't go out intending to draft Brock Bowers. They were trying very hard to trade up. They really wanted Michael Penix. They were trying very hard to trade up, and it fell into their lap, and they took best player available. And I think Mayer was a player that struggled with that, and he stepped away from the game for a little bit because of, I think, coming over those, and it's been talked about there. And JJ McCarthy gets made fun of for adopting this persona, but then Justin Jefferson says he kind of has a little bit of the same thing that he's done, and that's
It's cool
something
when Justin
that
Jefferson does it because he's a good football player, and it's cringy when JJ McCarthy does it because everybody's written him off as a bust.
But that's a real strategy. That's a real mental health strategy to, when you're faced with a difficult, stressful situation, to maybe JJ McCarthy does struggle in that situation, but maybe is it 9? Is that the persona? Or yeah, it's like you become a superhero basically. Like take your Clark Kent glasses off and put the cape on, and you're ready to go. And it's the reality of just, this is a difficult time in the world. And Bucky Irving, being a young player, your career is ready to take off. You fought through, you earned the job from Rachaad White, and then all of a sudden you're ready for, this is going to be my window to go. And then the injury happens, and then you got to get back rolling. And meanwhile, while you're out, Rachaad White, it looks pretty good in early work. And then now Sean Tucker has a massive blow up game, and you're feeling like, well, did I miss my chance? I mean, Wally Pipped has been a thing for nearly 100 years now at this point. And Bucky Irvin definitely didn't get Wally Pipped here, but it's just so fleeting. And I think that guys that are self-aware and that recognize how fleeting this can be. We call it, it's not for long. It's the not for long league. And I think that it is something that, you might have a guy that there's probably definitely players in the league that maybe they're in Vegas casinos until in the morning. And the reality of things is not necessarily, maybe they miss a meeting on Friday and they get benched for 2 weeks in a row, or maybe other guys that you're just kind of, the world is happening around you. And you have other guys that you think about every single thing that is happening, and those can really mount on you.
And I think the financial implications too, like we don't talk about that too much, but like I know the financial implications probably have to be weighing on Bucky Irving pretty heavily too. Like, this is a guy who probably after his rookie season, after winning the rookie job, was expecting that, a year or two from now he would be getting generational wealth, some sort of massive extension. And like, you can't help but think that, like, now that he's dealing with injuries, now that he's looking like other players are stepping in his role and playing well, that he feels like he's less expendable, or more expendable, I should say. And like, maybe some of that generational wealth that he had already started kind of counting his chickens before they hatched, now that is looking further and further away. So like, there's so much that goes into this. Wishing him the best. Like, I want Bucky Irving to come back as soon as possible, and I want him to just like remind everybody of what a great player he is. He looked phenomenal last year. When he came in this year, he picked up right where he left off. Like, he is impossible to bring down in the open field. He is such a jitterbug type of player. Like, I want to see him come back out there, and somebody who struggled personally with mental health issues. Like, I can't help but be very empathetic to this situation. So I really just don't like the way that all of this is being reported about, that it's kind of this like hush hush, I'll tell you what's happening off camera, when the reality is, like, it's tough for a young man like this to have to come back from an injury. And all I could say is hope for the best when he's back out there. We're firing him up as an RB1. Jeff, is there anything else to really talk about from this game? We talk about the Rams, but this is, again, like the cleanest offense in football. I've heard talk about, the Rams playing out of a lot of 13 personnel and how that's a death knell for Puka Nacua. I am not going to get scared off of Puka Nacua because Davis Allen and Terrence Ferguson are seeing more snaps. Like, it's Puka Nacua. He hasn't had 100 yards in the last couple of games. He's still the per game wide receiver too. Like, and I'm ranking him just like that still.
Yeah, maybe I'm feeling a little bit burnt because I was a little bit higher on Tez Johnson last week. But Tez Johnson, as long as Godwin's out, he's locked in as the outside receiver. But he's really touchdown dependent. He had gone over 40 yards 5 games in a row before, but he'd never gone over 60 yards in those games. But it was really the touchdowns that were putting him on the radar. This is a really good Rams defense, and so I think that is a factor. The Rams have gotten hit with some injuries here. You mentioned the Tyler Higbee injury. Quentin Lake, defensive back, went down. That was a really brutal game last week against Seattle, and so I think that if you're hoping on the Buccaneer side, maybe you're hoping that the Rams fired some bullets last week and they're kind of struggling to put some pieces back together. We haven't really seen that for this Rams this year. I think this is a very, very talented, very good football team. The front seven is excellent. Young, outside of Jared Verse, not a lot of guys that a lot of people know about, but they've really been dominant up front. And I think that you want Sean Tucker to be here if Bucky Irving's out, or you want, nobody wants Rachaad White at this point, but Rachaad White's family, and I don't mind Rachaad White, but either way, this has been a good run defense from the Rams side. But I think when you break down the targets, we know the volume is there for Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. I have a really hard time. Like if the 13 personnel is the reason, I don't think it's the reason at all that Puka Nacua is not doing the things that he was doing. I think he got hurt, and I think that this is maybe at the forefront, maybe smartest team in terms of managing workloads for players and recognizing we're 8-2, we're rolling on this thing. We have intentions to go to the Super Bowl. We're not going to. There's been a lot of conversation throughout.
Save those 18 touchdown or those 18 touch Puka games for the playoffs.
Well, and there was a lot of talk this summer. Again, the Rams are another team that I did the summer camp reports about. There was a lot of talk about saving Puka Nacua from himself. Basically, and part of it was bringing Devontae Adams in, and Devontae Adams really working with Puka Nacua to be like, we just got to save you from yourself sometimes, because we all love it. It's so much fun watching and I'm going to run through a dude's face and having that mentality. And Puka Nacua has to operate with that mentality, because we see other situations where a player might lose that edge and they really fall off. But the team is very cognizant of recognizing they need to protect Puka Nacua from himself. And that is why the volume has been down. It's not anything else. It's a team that's rolling, winning games, saying we don't need to give this guy 15 targets. And yeah, in our game in fantasy, that lowers the ceiling of a player and moves from being this guy that's going to smash and be the runaway wide receiver one to he's still very much a wide receiver one. And maybe you shouldn't be freaking out too much about it, because the potential is there for touchdowns any single week. And boom games are there, but they are going to be intentional.
Last thing I'll say, back to Bucky Irving real quickly here. As we have been recording, since 6 a.m. Mountain Time, there's been kind of a source off happening on Twitter that I just was kind of looped into, that I saw real quickly. The Rondé Barber and Mike Florio tweets about Bucky Irving's mental health have now been deleted. And, I talked about how Rick Stroud was pushing back on this a little bit. Greg Allman, another very respected Bucs beat reporter, is also pushing back on this. And he said that Todd Bowles will address Bucky Irving's status after practice today. I'm told that he is in a good place and close to a return to playing. So it sounds like you've got these national reporters kind of breathing life into this story and making it bigger than it actually is. Well, the Tampa Bay beat is pretty quick to just squash this and make it sound like it's not as big of a deal as others are making it out to be. So again, hoping Bucky Irving can return as quickly as possible. Anything else here, Jeff, or can we move on to Monday Night Football?
Just real quick on the tight ends, because Tyler Higbee going on IR, and so it's Terrence Ferguson season, because this is what we do. It's every rookie, but it's only rookies of Colby Parkinson. Colby Parkinson's been really the guy that has moved ahead of that depth chart. I don't know that it's really there for anybody outside of getting a touchdown, but Parkinson was the guy that really stepped up in snaps when Tyler Higbee went out. You're going to have all three of these tight ends playing. Ferguson has shown explosive ability. The ability is there for Ferguson to make a big play. I think when it comes down to it, you're going to have Parkinson that's going to move a little bit more towards being that guy that is taking most of the snaps, red zone threat. We've seen touchdowns back-to-back weeks, had a revenge game touchdown against the Seahawks last week. If you're desperate, it's a touchdown dependent play. I think Parkinson would be there potentially. We just haven't seen any volume for anybody in this passing game outside of Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua, but everybody gets their 2 targets. Anybody could score a touchdown. It's just, that's what you're dealing with.
I gotta say, Devontae Adams' stat line last week really cracked me up. 8 targets, 1 reception, 1 yard, 1 touchdown. He's just gonna find a way to get it done.
his 1,000th career reception. So he did cross that threshold.
He did. All right. Last game of the week, Monday Night Football, Carolina Panthers at San Francisco 49ers. And a reminder, we don't get any Wednesday practices here, so we've only got the one data point to work with. Bryce Young practicing in full, Tedero McMillan practicing in full, Xavier Legette practicing in full. Christian McCaffrey gets his typical early week rest day, so he didn't practice, but no concern there. Ricky Pearsall practicing in full, Brock Purdy practicing in full. So everybody that we care about is going to be healthy. Jeff, this Bryce Young game, man, like there is setting career highs and then there is just like completely smashing career highs. Bryce Young had, as you said, 448 passing yards last week. That was 120 yards more than he has ever passed for in a single game. Where the heck did this come from against a good Falcons defense? I don't get it.
Yeah, we've been lamenting this week a little bit behind the scenes on we just want to get it right. We want to get it right for people out there because
Everything
that's
pointed
our
to a down Tedero
job.
McMillan game last week. Like everything was saying, like, okay, like we're starting to have some concerns, and then boom, like just best game of his career.
It's one of those that to have been on the Carolina passing game last week, it's almost sometimes you run into these situations where you're lamenting getting things wrong, but recognizing that to have called this Carolina Panthers passing game last week would have just been bad process, I think, to get to that point, or
Right.
just guessing is the only two ways that you could have gotten to this. Of it would call into question the process that is employed to get there because of what you've seen on both sides of this, or somebody just got lucky and is guessing on everything. And so I think that's where it comes down to just the surprise explosion game that we saw from Bryce Young from the passing elements.
What else do we want to talk about with this one? Rico Dowdle, we're firing him up now. Tedero McMillan, we're looking at him pretty confidently. I see you smirking, Jeff. What do you want to talk about here?
Revenge. We got Christian McCaffrey going up against those Carolina
True.
Panthers.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we got a little bit of revenge here on Monday Night Football. Christian McCaffrey in this spot. Christian McCaffrey, he joined Roger Craig and Marshall Faulk as the only players with 700 rushing and 700 receiving yards through the first 11 games of the season. He is 2 catches from becoming the 5th running back in NFL history with 600 in his career. And one more touchdown would move him into 8th place on the 49ers all-time list, tying him with Frankie Albert in rushing touchdowns. So you got Christian McCaffrey narratives running around here. And your boy, Ricky Pearsall, we saw him back last week. And I think that overall, looking at the 49ers targets, I think it's really difficult to project any of these players moving ahead. What you have seen in the last month, it's been so consistent with Christian McCaffrey, with Juwan Jennings, with George Kittle getting almost the exact same amount of targets every single week, and then having another 4th secondary player being Kendrick Bourne previously. I think that to look at this, you would say the ceiling is there for these pieces being healthy, and it's great for Brock Purdy, and you can play any of them every single week. And McCaffrey certainly is McCaffrey, but week to week, nobody is going to emerge as being the clear top target guy here. It's going to be, you've got 3 guys at least between Jennings, Kittle, and McCaffrey that are going to get their 6 to 8 targets a week. Maybe Pearsall gets into there being the 6 to 8 targets, and maybe Pearsall returns to full health and can be a 100-yard game guy because he is so explosive down the field. But I think that you're just not going to get anybody that we just talk about the Rams of the Devonta Adams and Puka Nacua clean targets and go in there. It's clean in terms of, exactly where they're going, but there's not boom weeks. I don't think too much for the 49ers.
I'm still holding on to some hope that last week was just kind of that ramp up for Ricky Pearsall. Like the guy missed 2 months of football and clearly wasn't 100%. I still think that, 2-3 weeks from now, as we head into the fantasy playoffs, it wouldn't surprise me if we do see this receiver room flip a little bit, where like Pearsall is just the clear dominant wide receiver one ahead of Juwan Jennings. Of course, he still has to deal with Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle, but they all operate in such different areas of the field. Christian McCaffrey is catching his targets at the line of scrimmage. George Kittle is catching his in the intermediate area across the middle of the field. And I still think Ricky Pearsall can be that field stretching guy. I mean, we saw him averaging prior to the injury over 80 yards per game, which is an elite clip. So maybe I'm just a sucker, but I am not willing to throw in the towel on Ricky Pearsall yet. Jeff, anything else in this one? I think the one other thing I want to say, which like no surprise to anybody, but George Kittle is freaking back, and it is so awesome to see. Like Brock Purdy and George Kittle, they're just such a fun duo. Like they clearly have just an unconscious chemistry with each other. I don't know, it's so hard to even like rank these tight ends on a weekly basis, but really what it comes down to, like if you're a fantasy manager and you are gearing up towards the playoffs, you want to have Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, George Kittle, Tyler Warren. And if you don't have one of those guys, you are just at a massive disadvantage. So, like, those are guys that I am willing to move mountains for before heading into the fantasy playoffs, just to give me that huge positional advantage at tight end.
Yeah, I mean, this one, I hear you on Pearsall. 100 yards can be in play. Touchdown or two can be in play for sure. I just don't, volume is my biggest thing. I think when you're looking at the 49ers have to be feeling really uncomfortable because of the way that their season started 3-0, and now they're at very real risk of falling out of this. And this could be a very pivotal matchup for playoff positioning, for maybe even the 7 seed in the NFC. And so you've got we talked about the Packers. I mean, Packers 6-3-1. I mean, that tie kind of makes things a little bit wonky for tiebreakers, but Panthers would hold a tiebreaker over the Packers if they could gain a tiebreaker over the 49ers in this game. Panthers very, very alive to sneak into the playoffs there, or this might be where their hope gets extinguished for the Panthers. So I think that there's a high leverage in this game between these two teams when you're looking at playoff positioning.
Anything else, Jeff? Any final thoughts on week 12 before we sign off here?
No, I mean, it's just, I think overall, talk about the 49ers, or we let off talking about the Texans. Just some of these teams, we're getting into some of these situations where teams that were written off early in the season have really put some things together and really coming on hot. And teams that started super hot. I mean, I think you see the Kansas City and the Indianapolis game, or you see you're having the Ravens have won 3 in a row after looking at. I think it's just kind of an interesting point of the season. I think it's a tough point of the season. If you're out there, I know me personally, I think it's really hard. You're making content every single week to this point of the year because we've just been beaten down for months now at this point, but we still have like 7 weeks before the finish line. So there's still a lot of season left. Just know that if you're out there feeling those types of things, there are other people out there that are feeling those things too. I think that overall, just kind of, I think having moments like that, I had written about on Monday, I took my daughter to the Buckeyes game on Saturday night, and I recognized that the Buckeye season was ending. And I really had 2 more opportunities to go to a game, and I love going to game. And it was just going to the game and unplugging and not being worried about flipping through all the channels to make sure that I knew what was happening in Georgia versus Texas, or not being blasted in the face with red zone for 7 hours consecutively. Like, these are things that it's real. It wears on you week over week when we're in the grind, but then just having those moments of disconnecting. And what I wrote about was, I said, go to a game, and your game doesn't have to be a game, but there's things that, like for you, Dave, go climb a mountain. Me, go to a football game. Or like me, like, kind of, we're getting ready here for Thanksgiving upcoming, and just a time that we do collect and we stop and take a breath and say thanks. But part of that Thanksgiving is to recognize the things that you're thankful for and take a moment. Like, even don't feel selfish about it. Take a moment to do those things that make you feel like these are the things I'm thankful for, because I think it is a really valuable reminder.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because this was a week where, like, it's a crazy thing that we do, having to do this every single week, looking at every single game, every single player, watch every game, dig through the data and all that. And like I just kind of had this like moment of realization last week where I was like, I have been a crappy husband for the last 2.5 months. And like I need to do a better job. And this week, I just made a very intentional effort, like got dinner with my wife on Tuesday night. Sunday we just both kind of unplugged in the evening and we went to a concert together. We went to JC Penney on Wednesday night and took couples photos together so we can send out our Christmas cards. And we're going to see Wicked tonight. And guess what? I was still able to get my work done, and I was still able to consume everything. And I was able to help my wife clean up after dinner yesterday, and just like taking those moments for the important things. We love football, but there is more to life than football. And we get so bogged down with the day-to-day stuff that, like, take those moments to spend time with the people that you love and be thankful for the things that you are thankful for, and be a good husband and be a good father and be all those things. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I had a massive reframe this weekend where I was like, I need to be a better husband, and I need to show my wife like how appreciated she actually is.
I'm right there with you. We lost a friend of ours. We lost our friend Nick Mangold, a family friend. We lost him a month ago, and that weekend, my daughters had a dance event on Saturday night, and we had babysitting lined up for a couple of hours, and I had been so just wrapped up with work. My day job had been really busy up to that point. Football had been really busy. I just missed it. Like it was just not like the opportunity to. My wife means everything to me, and the opportunity to go out with her, I'd missed it. And then we lost our friend Nick that weekend, and coming out of that, it's been a real take those moments because they're so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, I want to thank everybody, all 2,500 people who tuned in to this morning's live stream. I want to especially thank Aaron and Spaz and Joey Wright and Fantasy Beatball and the people who have been in the chat with us since we first launched this show early this morning. And want to thank everybody who's going to listen to this on podcasts, YouTube, wherever they check it out later on this week as well. Want to wish everybody best of luck this weekend in a fun Week 12 slate. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.